Stand before the Great Pyramid at dawn, and you feel it before you understand it. The scale doesn't register at first. Your eyes tell you it is large, but your brain struggles to process what large actually means when confronted with 2 million tons of precisely cut stone rising from the desert. Most visitors take photos, check their phones, move on, but some pause. Some stare longer than they intended. Some feel a whisper of wrongness they can't quite name. What if everything you learned about ancient history was designed to hide a truth too unsettling to accept? The numbers themselves are violent against common sense. 2.3 million limestone blocks. Not bricks, not manageable human-sized pieces. Blocks averaging 2.5 tons each, with some weighing 15 tons or more, stacked with such precision that you cannot slide a credit card between them, aligned to true north with an accuracy of 3/60ths of a single degree. Modern architects with laser-guided instruments and computer modeling consider themselves successful when they achieve tolerances 10 times less precise. We've been told a story, a comfortable story. Ancient Egyptians, armed with copper tools and wooden sledges, somehow quarried these stones from sites miles away, transported them across desert and river, then lifted them into position with nothing but human muscle and ingenuity. The timeline we're given is 20 years. The workforce, 100,000 laborers rotating in shifts. Do the mathematics yourself. 20 years is 7,300 days. 2.3 million blocks divided by 7,300 days. That is 315 blocks per day, every single day. No holidays, no weather delays, no mistakes. Now divide those 315 blocks by 24 hours. That is 13 blocks per hour, 1 block every 4.5 minutes, but that assumes perfect conditions, no sleep, no human limitations. Factor in the reality that work likely happened during daylight, maybe 12 hours a day. Now you're placing 1 block every 2 to 3 minutes, for 2 decades straight. Try moving a 2-ton stone with copper and wood. Try lifting it. Try setting it so precisely that 4,000 years of earthquakes and erosion won't create gaps wide enough for a razor blade. The precision extends beyond the obvious. The pyramid's base covers 13 acres and achieves near-perfect levelness, deviating by less than an inch across its entire footprint. Its 4 sides align almost exactly with the 4 cardinal directions. The internal chambers demonstrate knowledge of acoustics, of weight distribution, of mathematical constants that supposedly wouldn't be discovered for thousands of years. The king's chamber uses granite blocks weighing 70 tons each, transported from Aswan, 500 miles away. Even skeptics, even mainstream archaeologists who dismiss ancient astronaut theories with practiced disdain, admit the engineering remains unexplained. They offer theories involving ramps, theories involving water locks, theories involving technologies lost to time, but theories are not evidence. Theories are what we tell ourselves when we cannot face the alternative. Consider what it means that this structure has stood for 46 centuries. Consider that the Great Pyramid was already ancient when Rome was founded. Consider that more time passed between its construction and Cleopatra's reign than between Cleopatra and us. Consider that it remained the tallest human-made structure on Earth for 3,800 years, only surpassed in the 14th century. And consider this final detail: the ancient Egyptians themselves never claimed to have built it alone. They spoke of gods who descended from the sky. They described beings who brought knowledge of mathematics, astronomy, engineering. They carved stories into stone about a time before history when the gods walked among men and taught them secrets that elevated them from primitive tribes to a civilization that appeared almost overnight, fully formed. But those are just myths, we're told. Stories to explain what primitive minds couldn't understand. The question becomes unavoidable. If not humans alone working with primitive tools, then who? Ask an Egyptologist how the pyramids were built, and you'll receive an answer delivered with such confidence that you almost forget it is not actually an answer at all. Ramps, they say, massive earthen ramps that spiraled around the structure as it rose. Tens of thousands of workers pulling stones on wooden sledges, human ingenuity and determination. Press for details. Ask how a ramp could maintain a usable incline while reaching 480 feet into the sky. Ask how much earth would be required to build such a ramp more material than the pyramid itself. Ask where this massive ramp disappeared to, since no archaeological evidence of it exists. Watch the confidence fracture. Watch the answer become vaguer. Watch the conversation end. Sometimes the most dangerous question isn't whether something is possible, it is why we're so afraid to ask. In 1997, Japanese researchers from Waseda University attempted to build a small pyramid using ancient Egyptian tools and methods. They failed. They couldn't cut the stones with copper tools. They couldn't transport them efficiently with wooden sledges. They couldn't lift them into place without modern equipment. Their pyramid, intended to reach just 45 feet, collapsed before completion. The experiment demonstrated what many engineers have suspected: the official explanation doesn't work. Not at small scale, certainly not at the scale of Giza, yet mainstream archaeology refuses to acknowledge the problem. The narrative remains unchanged: copper tools, wooden sledges, human muscle. Any suggestion that something more might be involved triggers immediate dismissal. Not as wrong, but as unworthy of consideration, as beneath academic dignity. This is cognitive dissonance at civilizational scale. We cannot accept that ancient people might have possessed knowledge we've lost. We cannot entertain possibilities that challenge the comfortable progression of history we've constructed. Primitive humans slowly, steadily advancing toward our modern enlightenment. The idea that knowledge might have flowed backward, that ancient civilizations might have understood things we're only now rediscovering, threatens the foundation of how we view ourselves. But the question persists, whispered at first, growing louder with each unexplained precision, each impossible engineering feat. The ancient Egyptians carved detailed stories about beings who descended from the sky. They called them Neteru, gods who brought knowledge of mathematics, of astronomy, of architecture that transformed simple farmers into master builders seemingly overnight. Dismiss it as mythology if it comforts you. Then explain why the Sumerians told nearly identical stories about the Anunnaki, beings from the heavens who taught them writing, law, agriculture. Explain why the Mayans spoke of Kukulkan, descending from the sky to share wisdom. Explain why the Dogon tribe in Mali possessed detailed astronomical knowledge about the Sirius star system, information that shouldn't have been accessible without telescopes. Explain why cultures separated by oceans and millennia, with no possible contact, all chose the same explanation for their sudden advancement. They looked to the sky. They pointed up. They said the same thing in different languages. They came from above and taught us. Academic circles treat this question like a contagion. Archaeologists who seriously examine these connections risk their careers. The label is applied swiftly: pseudo-archaeologist, ancient astronaut theorist, fringe researcher. The words carry enough weight to destroy credibility, to end funding, to close doors, so most stay silent. They catalogue artifacts, publish papers on pottery fragments, and avoid the larger questions that hover over their entire field like storm clouds. This documentary doesn't exist to prove aliens built the pyramids. That is too simple, too convenient a conclusion. We're here to examine evidence that mainstream archaeology systematically ignores, to ask questions that make people uncomfortable, to follow threads that lead into darkness rather than accepting the dim light of incomplete explanations. Because something happened in our ancient past, something that doesn't fit the timeline we've been taught. And the more we look, the more suspicious it becomes that we're discouraged from looking. Peru, high in the Andes Mountains, at an altitude where oxygen becomes scarce and modern travelers struggle to breathe, sits Machu Picchu. The stones fit together with such precision that no mortar was needed. Not because the Inca were skilled masons, but because they shaped massive granite blocks into irregular polygons that interlock like three-dimensional puzzles. Each stone is unique. Each surface meets its neighbor at a different angle. Yet they fit so perfectly that 500 years later, earthquakes that destroy modern buildings leave these walls untouched. They couldn't have known each other existed, yet somehow they all knew the same impossible secrets. England. Stonehenge rises from Salisbury Plain, its massive sarsen stones weighing 25 tons each, transported from quarries 20 miles away. The smaller blue stones weighing 4 tons came from Wales, 140 miles distant. But the mystery isn't just the transportation, it is the precision. The monument aligns with the summer solstice sunrise and winter solstice sunset. The builders understood astronomy well enough to encode celestial movements into stone. People, we're told, were barely beyond hunter-gatherers. Easter Island. The Moai statues stare inland, their backs to the ocean. They weigh up to 80 tons. They were carved from volcanic rock, then transported miles across rough terrain to their final positions. The islanders, we're taught, had no wheels, no metal tools, no pack animals. Yet somehow, they moved these giants and erected them on platforms with astronomical alignments. When asked how their ancestors accomplished this, modern islanders say the statues walked, the stones walked. Turkey. Göbekli Tepe shouldn't exist. Built 11,000 years ago, it predates agriculture, predates civilization as we define it. Yet its massive T-shaped pillars weighing up to 20 tons each feature intricate carvings of animals and symbols. The site required planning, organization, sophisticated tools, and astronomical knowledge. It was built by hunter-gatherers. Then, inexplicably, it was deliberately buried, preserved beneath earth for millennia until its rediscovery in the 1990s. Peru again. The Nazca lines stretch across 200 square miles of desert. Massive geoglyphs visible only from the air, depicting animals, geometric shapes, perfectly straight lines extending for miles, created by removing the top layer of reddish pebbles to reveal the lighter ground beneath. Simple in concept, impossible in execution. To draw a perfectly straight line for 9 miles across varied terrain, maintaining width and depth consistency, requires surveying equipment the Nazca supposedly didn't possess, unless they could see from above. Bolivia, Puma Punku presents stones cut with such precision that they appear machine-tooled. Perfect right angles, smooth surfaces, interlocking sections that suggest modular construction. Some stones weigh 130 tons. The quarry lies 10 miles away across Lake Titicaca. No one has successfully explained how blocks of this size were moved, lifted, and placed with tolerance levels measured in fractions of millimeters. Cambodia. Angkor Wat, the largest religious structure ever built, encodes the precession of the equinoxes into its measurements. Its layout mirrors the constellation Draco as it appeared in 10,500 BC. Thousands of years before it was built, the pattern repeats. Different continents, different time periods, different cultures with different languages, different religions, different technologies, yet the same impossible precision, the same astronomical knowledge, the same megalithic construction that challenges modern engineering, the same stories of beings from the sky who taught them. One civilization achieving something extraordinary might be genius, 2 might be coincidence, but dozens across every inhabited continent, all demonstrating knowledge and capabilities that shouldn't exist in their time period, all telling variations of the same story about teachers from above. Coincidence becomes statistically absurd. The pattern demands explanation. What if these weren't isolated achievements? What if they weren't separate cultures independently discovering impossible secrets? What if someone was moving across the ancient world, teaching, demonstrating, leaving monuments as proof of their presence? What if the same hands or the same knowledge touched civilizations separated by oceans and centuries? The question grows heavier with each impossible stone, each inexplicable alignment, each culture that points to the sky and says they came from there. Egypt holds the clearest evidence. Its monuments, its texts, its mysteries form the foundation of the pattern. To understand what happened across the globe, we must first understand what happened on the Giza Plateau. Treat the Great Pyramid not as a monument but as a crime scene. The official story has been told so many times it is accepted as fact. But like any investigation, when you examine the evidence closely, the narrative begins to fracture. Start with the tools. We're told ancient Egyptians cut 2.3 million limestone blocks using copper tools. Copper, a metal softer than the limestone it supposedly shaped. In 2014, a team of experimental archaeologists attempted to replicate this process using accurate copper tool reconstructions. They worked on a single limestone block for 6 weeks. They managed to create rough cuts, nothing approaching the precision seen at Giza. Scale this to 2.3 million blocks. Scale it to the time frame of 20 years. The mathematics become absurd. Granite presents an even greater impossibility. The king's chamber uses granite blocks weighing 70 tons each, transported from Aswan 500 miles away. Granite rates 7 on the Mohs hardness scale. Copper rates 3. You cannot cut something harder with something softer, not without wearing through thousands of copper tools per block. Yet no massive copper tool dumps have been found at Giza, no industrial-scale copper production facilities, no archaeological evidence of the tool economy that would be required. When the math doesn't work and the physics don't add up and the timeline falls apart, what is left is the truth we've been avoiding. Transportation presents its own impossibilities. Engineers at Drexel University calculated the force required to move a 2.5-ton block across sand using wooden sledges and rope. Even with wetted sand to reduce friction, it requires 20 to 30 men per block. For 2.3 million blocks, accounting for rest periods, injuries, and the reality that not all blocks were transported simultaneously, you need coordinated labor on a scale that exceeds the population of ancient Egypt. The math doesn't work, the logistics collapse under scrutiny. The ramp theory, the cornerstone of conventional explanation, fails even basic engineering analysis. A ramp with a 7-degree incline, necessary to make pulling stones feasible, would need to stretch nearly a mile to reach the pyramid's apex. That ramp would require more material than the pyramid itself. A spiral ramp wrapping around the pyramid faces different problems. The corners would need impossibly tight turns for teams of men pulling massive stones. Internal ramp theories require the ramp to be built inside the structure as it rises, then somehow removed without leaving evidence. Every ramp proposal solves one problem while creating 3 others. Mark Lehner, one of the world's leading Egyptologists, spent years attempting to prove the conventional narrative. He built experimental pyramids, tested tool theories, calculated labor requirements. His conclusion, buried in academic language, but clear to those reading carefully, the methods he tested don't scale to Giza. They work for small structures, they fail for monuments of this magnitude. Then there is the Sphinx. In 1990, geologist Robert Schoch examined the erosion patterns on the Sphinx enclosure. Water erosion. Deep, vertical channels cut by heavy rainfall over extended periods. Egypt's last period of significant rainfall ended around 7000 BCE. The Sphinx, according to conventional chronology, was carved around 2500 BCE during a period of extreme aridity. Schoch's analysis suggests the Sphinx is at least 9,000 years old, possibly older. His credentials are impeccable. Boston University professor, peer-reviewed publications, decades of geological fieldwork. His findings have been attacked by Egyptologists, but never successfully refuted by geologists. The Egyptian Antiquities Authority refuses to allow core samples that could definitively date the structure. The question hangs unanswered. Physicist Dr. Louis Capozzi analyzed the precision of the Great Pyramid's construction using modern surveying equipment. The base achieves levelness within 1 inch across 13 acres. The sides align to true north within 3/60ths of 1 degree. The ratio of the pyramid's perimeter to its height encodes pi to several decimal places. These aren't approximations. These aren't close-enough achievements. These are precision measurements that require advanced mathematics and surveying technology. Modern construction, with laser theodolites and computer-aided design, considers itself successful with tolerances 10 times less accurate. The Burj Khalifa, the world's tallest building, achieves alignment to within 1/4 of a degree. The Great Pyramid, built supposedly with copper and rope, is 12 times more accurate. Each number adds to the impossibility. Each calculation expands the gap between what we're told happened and what the evidence suggests. Taken individually, perhaps these anomalies could be explained away. Taken together, they form an impossible picture. The ancient Egyptians achieved something that modern engineering struggles to replicate. Either they possessed technology and knowledge we've fundamentally misunderstood, or someone else did. someone whose capabilities exceeded our own. The Egyptians themselves left an answer, written in stone, carved into temples, preserved in texts that predate the pyramids. They told us where their knowledge came from. Perhaps it is time we started listening. The pyramid texts line the chambers of the Pyramid of Unas, carved around 2300 BCE. They're among the oldest religious writings in human history. Egyptologists read them as mythology, symbolic language about death and rebirth, but read them literally. Read them as eyewitness accounts recorded by people who lacked vocabulary for what they witnessed. The sky is pregnant with wine. The sky gives birth to the gods. They descend upon their iron thrones descending from the sky, beings emerging from the heavens. Not metaphor, description. They didn't call them gods because they were powerful. They called them gods because they came from the sky. The Edfu building texts, inscribed on the walls of the Temple of Horus, describe something they call Zep Tepi, the first time, a golden age before recorded history when beings called Neteru walked among humans. The texts are specific. These weren't spirits or abstractions. They were physical beings who arrived in boats of light, who possessed knowledge that transformed primitive tribes into the world's first great civilization. They taught writing, not gradually, not through centuries of pictographic evolution. The hieroglyphic system appears fully formed, complex and complete, with no archaeological evidence of development. They taught mathematics, geometry sophisticated enough to encode pi and phi into monuments. They taught astronomy. The Egyptian calendar was more accurate than the calendar Europe used until the 16th century. They taught medicine. Papyrus scrolls describe surgical procedures and anatomical knowledge that wouldn't be rediscovered until the Renaissance. All of this appeared simultaneously around 3100 BCE. No slow development, no gradual progression from simple to complex. Egypt goes from scattered tribal settlements to a unified civilization with monumental architecture, advanced mathematics, and written language in the span of a few generations. Anthropologists call this impossible. Civilizations don't work this way. They evolve slowly, building on incremental discoveries over centuries, unless someone teaches them, unless knowledge is transferred rather than discovered. The gods depicted in Egyptian art are consistent across dynasties: elongated skulls, large eyes, beings arriving in cylindrical objects that Egyptologists call sacred boats. But look at the designs. They're not boats. They're enclosed, streamlined, featuring what appear to be propulsion systems. The gods hold Ankh symbols, called the key of life. The shape is peculiar. A loop atop a T-shaped handle. Some researchers note its resemblance to technical diagrams, to wave frequency devices, to tools rather than symbols. Dismiss it if you choose. Then explain the Dendera light. On the walls of the Hathor temple at Dendera, a relief depicts what conventional archaeology calls a mythological scene. It shows large bulb-shaped objects connected by braided cables to a box-like device. Inside the bulbs, serpents stretch from one end to the other. The composition is identical to technical diagrams of Crookes tubes, early electrical discharge lamps invented in the 19th century. Engineers who've examined the relief note the presence of what appear to be insulators, power sources, and even specifications suggesting voltage requirements. The Egyptians had no word for electricity. They had no framework to describe technology. So they drew what they saw and called the serpents inside the bulbs gods. They called the entire apparatus sacred because they couldn't explain it. Surgical instruments found in tombs match modern designs so precisely that when shown to contemporary surgeons without context, they're identified by function immediately. Scalpels, forceps, bone saws, trepanation drills. Tools that shouldn't exist in the ancient world, but do, fashioned from bronze and copper with ergonomic handles and precision edges. The Great Pyramid's internal chambers contain no hieroglyphs, no decorative carvings, none of the elaborate artwork found in every other pyramid and tomb. The structure predates Egyptian writing. It predates Egyptian civilization. Geophysical analysis of the Geyser Plateau suggests construction much older than the conventional 4th dynasty dating. The inventory Stela, discovered in the 19th century, describes Pharaoh Khufu conducting repairs to the Sphinx, not building it, repairing it. The stela indicates these monuments were ancient even to the ancient Egyptians. What if the pyramids weren't built by Egyptians? What if they inherited them from whoever came before? What if the gods of Zep Tepe left monuments as proof of their presence, and the Egyptians spent thousands of years trying to understand and replicate what they found? The pyramid texts offer one more detail, repeated across different chambers, consistent in its strangeness. The gods came from a distant place in the sky called the imperishable star. Point to the sky. Tell someone you came from there. Watch them decide you're either lying or divine, unless you actually did. The Osirian lies beneath the temple of Seti I at Abydos. Most tourists never see it. Egyptologists date it to the 19th dynasty, around 1300 BCE. But descend the modern stairs, stand in the partially flooded chamber, and the dating becomes suspicious. The blocks are enormous, some weighing 120 tons. They fit together with precision measured in thousandths of an inch. No mortar, no gaps. Razor blades cannot penetrate the joints. They didn't just build monuments. They built impossible precision into every stone, as if leaving proof for future generations to find. In 1881, British archaeologist Sir William Flinders Petrie examined core drilling samples found in the Great Pyramid. The granite cores showed spiral grooves, evidence of rotational drilling. Petrie measured the groove pitch, the distance the drill advanced per rotation. His calculations indicated the drill descended into granite at a rate of 1/10 of an inch per revolution. Modern diamond-tipped drills powered by electric motors generating thousands of RPM achieve approximately 1/100th of an inch per revolution in granite. The ancient cores show 10 times the drilling efficiency of modern equipment. Petrie was troubled by this. He wrote extensively about it, proposing theories involving jewel-tipped drills and extraordinary pressure. But jewels would shatter under that pressure. The force required would destroy any hand-operated mechanism. His conclusion, buried in technical language: we are either dealing with a method totally unknown to modern engineers or with a power source and drill bit material we cannot identify. The Egyptian Museum in Cairo holds thousands of stone vases from pre-dynastic periods, not pottery, stone, carved from diorite, schist, and granite. Materials ranking 6 to 7 on the Mohs hardness scale. The vases feature impossibly thin walls, some less than a millimeter thick. The symmetry is perfect. Analysis reveals they were created on lathes. Not potter's wheels, lathes, machinery that rotates the stone while a cutting tool shapes it with precision. The lathe wasn't invented until the 7th century BCE by the Greeks. These vases predate that by 2,000 years. Modern stonemason Roger Hopkins attempted to replicate these vases for a Nova documentary. Using diamond-tipped tools and electric lathes, he produced vessels with walls 3 times thicker than the ancient examples. The symmetry was noticeably inferior. He admitted on camera that achieving ancient precision would require computer-guided machinery. The granite coffer in the king's chamber presents its own impossibility. Hollowed from a single piece of red granite, its internal and external surfaces are flat to within 1/1000th of an inch. The internal corners form perfect 90-degree angles. Try creating a 90-degree internal corner in granite. Try maintaining that angle consistently across all 4 corners. Modern stonemasons use specialized grinding equipment and computer-aided measurement. Even then, achieving ancient Egyptian tolerances is considered exceptional work. The coffer shows no tool marks. The surface is polished to a mirror finish. The walls are uniform in thickness. Ultrasonic testing reveals no fractures, no flaws, no evidence of the incremental grinding that would be necessary to achieve this result manually. Acoustic engineer John Reed measured sound resonance in the king's chamber. The chamber resonates at specific frequencies, 438 Hz, and its harmonic multiples. These frequencies don't occur naturally. The dimensions of the room, the material properties of the granite, the shape of the space, all combine to create what amounts to a precisely tuned resonance chamber. Reed's analysis suggests the builders understood acoustic physics well enough to engineer specific resonant frequencies into the structure. Why build a tomb with acoustic engineering, unless it wasn't a tomb? Christopher Dunn, a precision engineer with 40 years' experience in aerospace manufacturing, examined pyramid construction through the lens of modern machining. His conclusion: the precision I see in Egyptian artifacts matches what I create using computer-controlled mills, lathes, and surface grinders. I see evidence of straight saws, circular saws, even ultrasonic drilling. I see surface finishes that require diamond abrasives. I see tolerances that require measurement tools accurate to 10,000ths of an inch. These capabilities shouldn't exist in the ancient world, but the evidence sits in museums. Every establishment Egyptologist offers the same response. Ancient Egyptians were exceptionally skilled, but skill cannot overcome physical limitations. Skill cannot make copper cut granite. Skill cannot achieve precision that requires measurement tools you don't possess. Skill cannot produce lathe work without lathes. The evidence suggests technology. Advanced technology that either vanished completely from the archaeological record or was never Egyptian to begin with. Technology brought by someone else. Used, demonstrated, then taken away or lost when those who understood it departed or died. Egypt presents impossible precision in a civilization that supposedly used primitive tools. But Egypt wasn't alone. Across oceans and continents, other ancient cultures display the same impossible precision, the same unexplained technology, the same stories about beings from the sky. Mesopotamia, 3500 BCE. Sumerian clay tablets describe the Anunnaki, beings who descended from the heavens to the land between two rivers, not spirits, not abstractions. Physical beings who walked among humans, who taught them to write, to calculate, to organize cities and laws. The Sumerian king list, a historical document cataloguing rulers and dynasties, begins with a curious statement. After the kingship descended from heaven, the kingship was in Eridug. Descended from heaven, not metaphor. Statement of origin. The cylinder seals preserved in museums show what the Sumerians witnessed. Beings wearing what appear to be helmets with protrusions. Objects in the sky depicted with radiating lines, with multiple tiers, with details suggesting machinery rather than symbolic sun disks. The seals show these beings taller than humans, distinct in appearance, carrying devices the Sumerians had no names for. When dozens of ancient cultures tell the same story, beings descending from the sky to teach civilization, at what point does mythology become history? Peru. The Inca spoke of Viracocha, a bearded figure who appeared after a great catastrophe. He emerged from Lake Titicaca, they said, bringing knowledge of agriculture, architecture, and astronomy. He taught the people to build cities, to cultivate crops, to organize society. Then he walked into the Pacific Ocean and vanished, promising to return. The Inca depicted him as distinctly different from themselves, lighter skin, facial hair uncommon in indigenous populations, wearing garments unlike anything in their culture. 3,000 miles north, the Maya told nearly identical stories about Kukulkan. The Aztecs called him Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent. Same description. Bearded, technologically advanced, arrived from the sky, taught civilization, departed with promises of return. When Spanish conquistadors arrived with beards and unfamiliar technology, indigenous people initially believed these were the gods returning. The prophecies had said they would come from the east, from across the water. The timing matched. The appearance matched descriptions preserved across generations. India, the Vedas, composed between 1500 and 1200 BCE, describe vimanas, flying vehicles used by gods and ancient heroes. But these aren't vague mentions. The texts provide technical specifications. The Vaimanika Shastra, attributed to the sage Maharshi Bharadwaja, details construction methods, propulsion systems, energy sources. It describes different types of craft, some for atmospheric flight, others for space travel. It explains defensive capabilities, weapons that sound remarkably like directed energy systems. It mentions materials that don't rust, don't corrode, remain lightweight yet incredibly strong. Scholars dismiss this as fantasy. Engineers read it and see blueprints. The Mahabharata, one of Hinduism's great epics, describes aerial warfare in disturbing detail. Weapons that create firestorms consuming entire armies. Blasts so intense they vaporize water, radiation-like effects causing hair and nails to fall out. Survivors washing themselves and their equipment desperately to remove contamination. Replace divine weapons with nuclear devices. And the descriptions become uncomfortably specific. China, the Yellow Emperor, Huangdi, appears in texts dating to the 3rd millennium BCE. He descended from the sky in a dragon, a description that makes more sense when you consider ancient Chinese had no vocabulary for aircraft. The texts describe his dragon as metallic, as making sounds like thunder, as being able to carry him anywhere he wished to travel. He brought writing, mathematics, medicine, the calendar. After ruling for 100 years, he ascended back into the sky aboard his dragon, returning to the celestial realm. Aboriginal Australians speak of the Wandjina, sky beings who created the world and taught the first people. Rock paintings depicting the Wandjina show large heads, enormous eyes, no mouths, surrounded by radiating lines. The paintings are scattered across northwest Australia, some estimated at 4,000 years old. The Aboriginals maintain that they didn't create these images. The Wandjina left them as reminders of their presence. The specificity matters. These aren't creation myths explaining how the sun and moon came to be. These are encounter narratives. Detailed descriptions of beings with distinct physical characteristics arriving in craft that ancient witnesses struggled to describe using available vocabulary. Dragons, boats of the sky, chariots of fire. Different words for the same thing, technology misunderstood as divine power. Japanese legends describe the Kappa beings from the sky who taught rice cultivation and engineering. Pacific Island cultures speak of the cargo cult gods, technologically advanced beings who arrived in massive craft and departed, leaving people waiting for their return. Native American tribes across multiple regions tell stories of star people who taught them agriculture, medicine, and astronomy. The pattern transcends geography, it transcends time periods, it transcends cultural contact. These civilizations could not have coordinated their stories. They couldn't have known what symbols and descriptions others were using thousands of miles away, yet somehow they all describe the same thing. Beings from the sky, advanced knowledge transferred suddenly, civilization appearing where none existed before. Then departure, leaving humanity to advance, or decline on its own. If even one culture's account reflected actual historical events rather than mythology, it would revolutionize our understanding of human development. But it is not one culture, it is dozens. The question shifts from, did this happen, to what exactly happened, and where is the physical evidence? In 1936, workers excavating near Baghdad discovered a clay jar containing a copper cylinder. Inside the cylinder, an iron rod suspended by asphalt. Archaeologists dated it to 200 BCE and filed it away as a curious pottery fragment. In 1940, German archaeologist Wilhelm Koenig examined it more carefully and proposed something unsettling. It was a battery. The design is unmistakable to anyone familiar with electrochemistry. Copper acts as the cathode, iron as the anode. Fill the jar with acidic liquid, vinegar, wine, any electrolyte, and chemical reactions generate electrical current. Replicas built by skeptical engineers produced measurable voltage enough to electroplate metal. The Baghdad battery works. It shouldn't, but it does. These aren't ancient tools. They're ancient technology, and their existence suggests someone was teaching lessons we've forgotten. In 1901, sponge divers found a corroded bronze mechanism in a shipwreck off the Greek island of Antikythera. For decades it sat in storage, too fragile and complex to understand. X-ray analysis in the 1970s revealed something impossible, an astronomical calculator of staggering sophistication. 30 interlocking bronze gears, differential mechanisms, inscribed dials, tracking lunar cycles, solar eclipses, planetary movements. It predicted astronomical events years in advance. It compensated for the moon's elliptical orbit using mechanical computing. Nothing remotely comparable appears again in human technology until 1400 years later. The Antikythera mechanism represents a technological peak with no precedent and no successor. Something this sophisticated requires accumulated engineering knowledge, multiple generations of refinement. Yet we find it fully developed with no evidence of the developmental stages that should precede it. The Piri-Reis map, drawn in 1513 by Ottoman Admiral Piri-Reis, shows the Atlantic Ocean with remarkable accuracy. It depicts South America's eastern coastline, Africa's western coast, and something else, Antarctica. Not the ice-covered continent we know, but the landmass beneath the ice, coastlines, mountains, river valleys. Geographic features that haven't been visible for 6,000 years, buried under miles of ice since before recorded history began. Piri-Reis noted on the map that he compiled it from much older source maps, some dating to the time of Alexander the Great or earlier. But how did those source maps capture Antarctic coastlines before ice coverage? Who mapped Antarctica when it was still visible? The precision matches modern satellite surveys. In 1513, no one should have known Antarctica existed, let alone mapped its pre-ice topography. Costa Rica's Dictys Delta contains over 300 stone spheres, some weighing 16 tons, measuring up to 8 feet in diameter. They're perfectly round, not approximately spherical, geometrically precise spheres with accuracy within 1 centimeter. No tool marks. No evidence of how primitive cultures shaped them. Modern attempts to replicate them using ancient techniques have failed. Creating a perfect sphere from stone requires precision measurement, constant verification, techniques we associate with machine tools, not stone age tribes. Assyrian ruins at Nimrud yielded crystal lenses dating to 700 BCE, not crude magnifying glasses, precision optical equipment, ground and polished quartz exhibiting focal lengths, suggesting deliberate engineering. Archaeologists found multiple lenses, implying not accidental creation, but systematic production. Rock crystal is harder than almost any natural abrasive available to ancient cultures. Polishing it to optical quality requires diamond dust or modern ceramic compounds. The Nimrod lens now sits in the British Museum, labelled as a decorative item. But optometry experts examining it recognize professional optical grinding. Someone possessed knowledge of light refraction, focal points, lens geometry, principles not formally understood until the Renaissance. The Kozo artifact, discovered in California in 1961, appeared to be a geode. X-rays revealed a metallic core resembling a spark plug, encased in rock estimated at 500,000 years old. Mainstream archaeology dismisses it as a modern intrusion somehow embedded in ancient stone. But the X-rays are clear. The design is unmistakable. Each artifact presents the same problem. Taken individually, perhaps they're flukes, misidentifications, elaborate hoaxes. Taken collectively, they suggest systematic technological knowledge appearing in cultures that supposedly lacked it. The knowledge doesn't develop gradually. It appears fully formed, then vanishes. As if someone demonstrated it, then left, taking their understanding with them. The artifacts whisper the same message as the monuments. We've misunderstood our own history. Someone possessed advanced knowledge in the ancient world. Whether that knowledge originated with forgotten human civilizations or with visitors from elsewhere remains open. But its existence is undeniable. These objects exist. They function, and they shouldn't. The Mayans understood zero, not as absence, not as nothing, but as a mathematical concept. A placeholder that enables positional notation and complex calculations. They developed this independently around the 4th century CE. Europe wouldn't grasp the concept until the 13th century, importing it from Arab mathematicians who de-learned it from India. Yet somehow, Mayan mathematicians working in isolated jungle cities discovered what eluded Greek and Roman scholars for another 1,000 years. They knew things they shouldn't to have known. They calculated things they shouldn't to have been able to calculate, unless someone taught them. The Mayan long count calendar tracked time with precision that rivals atomic clocks. Over periods spanning thousands of years, it loses less than 1 day per 1,000 years. Creating such accuracy requires understanding of planetary mechanics, gravitational effects on orbital periods, and mathematical sophistication that supposedly didn't exist in pre-Columbian America. The calendar's accuracy exceeds the Gregorian calendar used by modern civilization. In Mali, the Dogon tribe possessed knowledge that should have been impossible. French anthropologists Marcel Griaule and Germaine Dieterlen studied Dogon oral traditions in the 1930s. The elders described Sirius, the brightest star in Earth's night sky, but they didn't just describe what anyone could see. They described Sirius B, a white dwarf companion star invisible to the naked eye, orbiting Sirius A every 50 years. They drew diagrams showing the elliptical orbit. They knew Sirius B was composed of extremely dense matter, heavier than anything on Earth. Sirius B wasn't confirmed to exist until 1862, when astronomer Alvin Graham Clark detected it through telescope. Its 50-year orbital period wasn't verified until the 20th century. Yet Dogon oral traditions passed down across generations contained this information centuries earlier. When asked how they knew, the elders said the Nomos told them, beings who descended from Sirius in a vessel that spun as it descended, landing in a great cloud of dust. Babylonian astronomical tablets from 700 BCE calculate planetary positions and movements with accuracy that wouldn't be matched until Copernicus and Kepler developed their models 2,000 years later. The tablets predict lunar eclipses, track Venus's movements, and demonstrate understanding of planetary retrograde motion, all requiring mathematical models of celestial mechanics that supposedly didn't exist. Ancient Indian texts contain mathematical concepts that seem impossibly advanced. The Surya Siddhanta, composed around 400 CA but claiming much older origins, calculates pi to 9 decimal places. It presents trigonometric functions including sine tables accurate to 4 decimal places. The Yuktibay, written in the 15th century but drawing on older texts, contains calculus concepts, infinite series, derivatives, integration techniques. European mathematicians wouldn't develop these for another 200 years. The Great Pyramid's coordinates encode the speed of light. Its latitude reads 29.9792458 degrees north. The speed of light in vacuum measures 299792458 meters per second. The match is exact to 8 significant figures coincidence. The pyramid's dimensions encode the golden ratio, 1.618, with precision. Its height multiplied by 1 billion approximates the distance from Earth to the Sunday. Its perimeter divided by twice its height yields per. These aren't vague correlations. These are precise mathematical relationships encoded into stone 4,000 years ago. Ancient Chinese astronomers recorded supernovae in 1985 CE and 1006 CE. Their records note positions, brightness, duration, observations that modern astronomers use to locate stellar remnants today. The records demonstrate understanding that these weren't comets or planets but stellar events. They tracked them with precision that required sophisticated observational techniques and mathematical modeling of celestial sphere geometry. The pattern repeats across civilizations, mathematical breakthroughs appearing without antecedent, astronomical knowledge requiring instruments that didn't exist, calendars more accurate than should be possible with naked eye observation. Each culture shows the same peculiarity. The knowledge doesn't evolve. It appears suddenly fully developed, as if downloaded rather than discovered. Human knowledge typically develops incrementally. Simple observations lead to primitive theories. Theories become refined through generations of testing and refinement. Technology advances slowly, building on previous innovations. This is how progress works. This is how civilizations develop. Unless someone teaches them, unless knowledge transfers from teacher to student, skipping the developmental stages, unless what we call mythology was actually history, records of contact with beings who possessed information we were thousands of years from discovering independently. The ancient cultures applied this impossible knowledge to create impossible structures, monuments that encode astronomical alignments, mathematical constants, engineering principles that challenge modern capabilities. To understand how deep this mystery goes, we must examine the monuments themselves. Baalbek, Lebanon, the Roman Temple of Jupiter, stands on a foundation that predates Rome by centuries. The foundation itself rests on stones, so massive they defy comprehension until you stand beside them. The Trilithon, 3 limestone blocks forming the temple's base. Each weighs approximately 800 tons. Not 800 pounds, 800 tons, 1,600,000 pounds per tone. Modern engineering can barely approach this. The largest mobile crane in the world, the Liber LTM 11200, can lift approximately 1,200 tons under ideal conditions, but only vertically, with the load directly beneath it. These stones weren't just lifted. They were quarried from a location half a mile away, transported across uneven terrain, raised to a foundation platform, and positioned with precision, edges aligned, surfaces level, fitted so tightly that no mortar was needed. They didn't just move impossible stones. They shaped them with impossible precision, as if the difficulty itself was the point. Calculate the logistics. An 800-ton stone requires 40 modern 20-ton cranes working in perfect coordination. Ancient builders supposedly used rope, wood, and human labor. Even if you could gather sufficient manpower, perhaps 8,000 men per stone, assuming each man could pull 200 pounds, coordinating that many people in synchronized movement across rough terrain becomes a logistical nightmare that exceeds the construction challenge itself. Engineers have attempted to demonstrate ancient methods. In 1999, Mark Lehner and Roger Hopkins tried moving a 2-ton obelisk using ancient Egyptian techniques for a Nova documentary. They succeeded, barely, with modern safety equipment and precise planning. The effort required involved hundreds of workers, perfect conditions, and multiple attempts. Scale that challenged by a factor of 400, from 2 tons to 800 tons. And the mathematics become absurd. The quarry where the Trilithon stones originated still contains an even larger block, partially carved from the bedrock. It weighs an estimated 1,000 tons. Ancient workers began cutting it but never finished. The stone lies there, testimony to ambition that exceeded even their impossible capabilities, or perhaps evidence that whoever began the work departed before completion. Peru's Sacsayhuaman fortress presents a different impossibility. The stones aren't irregular blocks, but irregular polygons, each uniquely shaped to fit its neighbors with 0 gaps. Some stones have 12 distinct angles, each surface meeting adjacent stones at different angles, creating 3-dimensional puzzles that would challenge modern computational geometry. The precision extends beyond fitting. The surfaces are smooth, the angles exact, the alignment perfect. Try designing such a structure. You must calculate the shape of each stone before cutting, accounting for how it will interface with surrounding blocks that themselves have irregular shapes. You must maintain precision through hundreds of stones, each weighing multiple tons, each requiring perfect execution, because a single error makes the stone useless. Computer modeling makes this possible today. In ancient Peru, supposedly armed with stone hammers, this should be impossible. Yet the walls stand. They've survived earthquakes that destroyed Spanish colonial structures built on top of them. The irregular shapes provide structural stability that exceeds conventional architecture. But that raises another question. How did ancient builders understand engineering principles that modern architects only discovered through computer modeling and stress analysis? Bolivia's Pumapunku adds another layer. The site contains H-shaped blocks cut from andesite and diorite, extremely hard stone with internal right angles and surfaces flat to within 1/1000th of an inch. Modern precision milling machines achieve this tolerance. Ancient stone workers, supposedly using harder stones to pound softer ones, should leave rough surfaces with visible tool marks. Pumapunku stones show neither. The precision serves no functional purpose. A wall built with rough-cut blocks holds up buildings equally well. Rough-cut blocks require less labor, less time, less precision tooling. Any rational construction project prioritizes efficiency. Yet ancient builders consistently chose the hardest possible path, moving the heaviest stones, achieving the tightest tolerances, creating the most complex geometric puzzles. Unless the precision itself was the message. Unless whoever built these structures wanted future generations to see what was possible, to recognize capabilities that exceed primitive technology, to question the comfortable narrative we've constructed about our past. Unless these monuments were designed not just as buildings, but as proof that someone possessed knowledge and technology we've lost. Proof that challenges every assumption about ancient capabilities. Proof carved in stone too heavy to move, shaped with precision too perfect to ignore. Look closely at the granite cores extracted from ancient Egyptian drilling operations. Run your fingers along the spiral grooves if museum curators would allow it. Those grooves tell a story that Egyptologists prefer not to hear. The grooves spiral down the core at a consistent pitch. The distance the drill advanced per rotation. Christopher Dunn, a precision engineer with 40 years' experience in aerospace manufacturing, measured these grooves. His analysis showed the drill descended 1 inch for every rotation. 1 full revolution, 1 inch deeper into granite. The stones remember, and what they remember is the touch of machines that shouldn't have existed. Modern diamond-tipped drill bits, powered by electric or pneumatic motors generating thousands of RPM, advance approximately 1 inch per 6 rotations when cutting granite. These ancient cores show 6 times the efficiency of modern equipment. Dunn's conclusion, published in peer-reviewed engineering journals. Either these drill marks indicate a technology we don't understand, or my 40 years of machining experience mean nothing. The implications are uncomfortable. You cannot achieve this rate with copper tools. Copper deforms under pressure against granite. Bronze fares slightly better, but still cannot maintain structural integrity while generating the forces required. The drill would need to rotate at high speed while applying tremendous downward pressure, conditions requiring machinery, power sources, drill bits made from materials harder than the stone being cut. Yet there the evidence sits, in museums, in quarries, on unfinished monuments, spiral grooves that shouldn't exist. Aswan quarries in Egypt contain partially completed obelisks, abandoned in various stages of production. The saw marks are visible. Straight cuts extending meters through solid granite, not rough cuts or irregular surfaces, but straight lines that maintain consistent depth and width. Modern stonemasons attempting to replicate these cuts using copper saws and abrasive sand, the supposed ancient method, produce wavy, irregular cuts. The blade bows under pressure, maintaining a straight line through meters of hard stone, while hand sawing is physically impossible. The ancient cuts show no wavering, no irregularity. They track straight as if guided by machinery. Pumapunku's H-blocks present another anomaly. The surfaces are parallel to within thousandths of an inch across spans of several feet. Creating parallel surfaces requires constant measurement and adjustment. With hand tools, you work one surface, flip the stone, work the opposite surface, measure for parallelism, correct discrepancies. The process is iterative, time-consuming, and rarely achieves precision beyond 1/100th of an inch without modern measurement tools. Pumapunku blocks achieve precision 10 times tighter, across multiple stones, consistently. Master stonemason Roger Hopkins examined photographs of these blocks. His assessment: if someone asked me to create these tolerances using hand tools, I'd tell them it is impossible. With power tools and dial indicators for measurement, I could do it, but it would take weeks per stone. The precision I'm seeing suggests manufacturing processes, not stoneworking. Scoop marks on blocks at various megalithic sites show another peculiarity. The marks follow paths that match CNC machining patterns, curved surfaces with consistent depth and radius, transitioning smoothly from one angle to another. Hand tools leave irregular marks, varying pressure, visible corrections. Machine tools leave mathematical curves, consistent depths, smooth transitions. The ancient stones show machine patterns. What is absent tells its own story. No practice pieces, no learning curve, no broken blocks showing mistakes or miscalculations. When modern engineers develop new manufacturing techniques, they produce mountains of failed attempts, gradual improvements, refinements across generations of development. The archaeological record of ancient sites shows none of this. The precision appears fully developed, as if whoever created it already possessed mastered techniques. Trial and error leaves evidence. Transferred knowledge does not. Museums catalogue these artifacts as examples of ancient patience and skill. But patience doesn't create spiral grooves advancing faster than modern drills. Skill doesn't produce machine, tool precision without machines. The evidence sits in glass cases marked with plaques explaining ancient copper tools and determination. The stones tell a different story, if anyone bothers to listen. Face true north, not magnetic north, which shifts and wanders, but true north, the point where Earth's axis pierces the celestial sphere. Finding it requires astronomical observation, mathematical calculation, instruments precise enough to measure fractions of degrees. The Great Pyramid, sides aligned to true north within 3/60ths of a single degree. When the Paris Observatory was constructed in the 17th century, it achieved alignment within 6 minutes of arc, 4 times less accurate than a monument built 4,000 years earlier using supposedly primitive tools. True north isn't T-static. Earth's axis precesses, wobbles like a spinning top, completing a full cycle every 26,000 years. This means true north changes position over centuries. Achieving the pyramid's precision in ancient times required either decades of careful astronomical observation or access to data that already accounted for precession. They didn't just build toward the stars. They built records of the stars, records that all point to the same impossible moment in time. Stand on the Giza Plateau and look at the 3 pyramids. Their positions mirror Orion's belt. 3 stars declining slightly from a perfect line, matching the pattern exactly. But not as Orion appeared in 2500 BCE when Egyptologists claim construction occurred. The alignment matches Orion's position in 10,500 BCE, calculated using astronomical software that models precession backwards through time. Coincidence, perhaps, except Angkor Wat in Cambodia, built supposedly in the 12th century, encodes the same date. The temple's layout maps the constellation Draco precisely as it appeared in 10,500 BCE. Same date, different continent, different culture, different stars, same message, pointing to the same moment. Stonehenge, massive sarsen stones frame the summer solstice sunrise with precision that requires understanding solar angles, latitude calculations, and multi-generational astronomical observation. The alignment isn't T-approximate. It is exact. Stand in the monument's center on the solstice, and the sun rises directly over the heel stone, flooding the central chamber with light. This precision requires decades of observation to account for subtle variations in Earth's orbit or possession of astronomical tables that already contained this information. The Mayan pyramid El Castillo at Chichen Itza demonstrates even more sophisticated knowledge. Twice yearly, during equinoxes, sunlight creates shadows on the pyramid's northern staircase. The shadows form triangles of light and dark that progress down the steps as the sun moves, creating the illusion of a serpent descending from the temple. This isn't accident. The pyramid's orientation, the angle of the staircase, the platform's height, all calculated to create this effect precisely on equinox days when the sun crosses the celestial equator. Creating this illusion requires understanding solar declination, the rate of change in the sun's S position throughout the year, and latitude, specific solar angles. The architects needed either centuries of observation or advanced astronomical knowledge transferred from an external source. The precision extends beyond alignment to encoded mathematics. The Great Pyramid, S dimensions encode pi. Its perimeter divided by twice its height yields 3.14159 to 5 decimal places. Its height multiplied by 1 billion approximates Earth's distance to the Sun. The golden ratio appears throughout its proportions. These aren't vague correlations, but precise mathematical relationships. Teotihuacan in Mexico encodes astronomical distances in its layout. The distance between the Pyramid of the Sunday and Pyramid of the Moon correlates to planetary orbits. The site, S orientation, 17 degrees off true north, aligns with the setting of the Pleiades star cluster on a date in its past corresponding to mythological founding. The pattern repeats. Different monuments, different cultures, different centuries, yet somehow they all point upward, encoding star positions, solar movements, astronomical constants into their structures, and many point specifically to 10,500 BCE, a date that predates known civilization by 6,000 years. What happened then? What moment in deep history warranted commemoration across continents, across cultures that supposedly never met? Why did multiple civilizations, separated by oceans and millennia, choose the same date to encode into monuments that would last forever? The stars don't lie. Their positions can be calculated forward and backward through time with mathematical certainty. The monuments point to them, and through them, to something that happened long before we thought history began. Take a globe. Mark the Great Pyramid at Giza. Now trace a line, a great circle, the shortest possible path around a sphere, and see what else that line touches. Petra in Jordan, Persepolis in Iran, Mohenjo-Daro in Pakistan, Angkor Wat in Cambodia, Sukhothai in Thailand, Phia in Myanmar. Continue the line across the Pacific. It passes through Easter Island before reaching Nazca in Peru. Draw a line across the globe through the world's most ancient monuments. The line is perfect. The alignment is impossible, unless someone planned it that way. Great circles aren't random. They're mathematically defined. The intersection of a sphere with a plane passing through its center. For ancient sites to align on a great circle requires either staggering coincidence or coordination that transcends individual civilizations, continents, and millennia. Yet there they sit, monument after monument, aligned within fractions of a degree across thousands of miles. Mainstream archaeology dismisses this as pattern, seeking the human tendency to find connections where none exist. But the mathematics resist dismissal. Calculate the probability of this many significant sites aligning by chance. The numbers become astronomical. Each additional site on the line reduces probability exponentially. By the time you reach 8 or 9 aligned monuments, coincidence becomes statistically absurd. The Great Pyramid sits at exactly 30 degrees north latitude, not approximately exactly. More precisely, it sits at 29.9792 degrees north, 1/3 of the distance between the equator and the North Pole when measured along Earth's surface. Someone chose that location with precision. Someone understood Earth's dimensions well enough to calculate fractional distances from the equator. Ancient Egyptians supposedly believed Earth was flat, carried on the back of a turtle or floating in an infinite ocean. Yet their primary monument encodes knowledge of Earth as a sphere with measurable dimensions. Multiple ancient cultures claimed their monuments represented the axis mundi, the center of the world. The Greeks called Delphi the omphalos, the world's navel. The Inca considered Cusco the center of the 4 quarters of the world. Jerusalem features in Abrahamic traditions as Earth's center. Each culture believed their sacred site occupied the most significant location possible. Plot these centers on a map, analyze their relationships. They form geometric patterns, triangles with angles encoding sacred ratios, distances that correlate to astronomical constants, positions that create mathematical relationships when measured against Earth's dimensions. The Great Pyramid, Cusco, and Angkor Wat form a triangle whose angles approximate the golden ratio. The distance from Giza to Stonehenge divided by the distance from Giza to Tiwanaku yields pi to 3 decimal places. These relationships shouldn't exist. Ancient cultures couldn't communicate across oceans. They couldn't share geographic coordinates or coordinate construction projects separated by thousands of miles. Yet the mathematics persist, encoded in stone, measurable and verifiable. Researchers measuring electromagnetic fields at these sites discovered anomalies. Giza shows elevated magnetic readings concentrated around the Grand Gallery. Stonehenge exhibits unusual electromagnetic signatures at specific stones. Machu Picchu's main temple sits atop granite with high quartz content, creating measurable piezoelectric effects. Teotihuacan's temples show magnetic anomalies corresponding to underground cavities filled with liquid mercury, hundreds of gallons of it, beneath pyramids for unknown purposes. Perhaps these sites were chosen for their energetic properties. Perhaps whoever built them understood something about Earth's magnetic field, about energy vortexes, about properties we're only beginning to measure with modern instruments. Perhaps the alignments aren't just geographic but energetic, following invisible lines of force that ancient builders could somehow detect or measure. The conventional explanation requires us to believe that dozens of ancient cultures working independently across thousands of years all chose to build their most significant monuments at locations that just happen to align in mathematically perfect patterns, that they coincidentally selected sites with unusual electromagnetic properties, that they randomly encoded the same astronomical dates, the same mathematical constants, the same geometric relationships into structures separated by oceans, or someone planned it. Someone with global perspective, understanding of spherical geometry, knowledge of Earth's dimensions and energetic properties. Someone who could survey the entire planet, identify optimal locations, and leave instructions that multiple cultures would follow across millennia. The monuments don't stand alone. They form a network, a global pattern that becomes more apparent the more you examine it. Each site connects to others through alignment, through mathematics, through shared impossible precision. The question evolves. Not just who built these monuments, but who planned their positions across the entire globe. Egypt built stepped pyramids, so did the Sumerians in Mesopotamia, so did the Maya in Central America, so did the Aztecs in Mexico, so did cultures in Indonesia at Gunung Padang. Not just mound-like structures that could be explained by convergent problem-solving. Build something tall, make it stable. Steps work, but nearly identical architectural designs. They orient to cardinal directions with astronomical precision. They incorporate internal chambers accessed by narrow passageways. They align with specific stellar configurations. They encode mathematical constants in their dimensions. The similarities aren't superficial. They're structural, mathematical, astronomical. When cultures who never met build the same structures, worship the same symbols, and tell the same stories, someone taught them. The question is who. The construction techniques match even more precisely. Egyptian temples at Karnak feature massive stone blocks, precisely cut, fitted together with no mortar. Surfaces meeting at irregular angles, forming complex polygonal shapes. Peru's Sacsayhuam Inn shows identical construction, not similar, identical, the same irregular polygonal fitting, the same lack of mortar, the same precision in surfaces meeting at multiple angles, same technique, separated by an ocean and supposedly thousands of years. Bolivia's Pumapunku presents another mirror, H-shaped blocks with precision internal angles, surfaces parallel within thousandths of an inch. Egypt's Osirian shows similar H-shaped blocks, similar precision, similar unexplained construction, different continents, different time periods according to conventional dating, identical engineering solutions to identical design challenges. The symbols repeat across impossible distances. The winged sun disk, a circular disk with wings extending from both sides, appears in Egyptian iconography as the symbol of Horus. It appears in Sumerian art representing Asher. It appears in South American ruins carved into temple walls by cultures that supposedly never encountered Middle Eastern civilizations. The design isn't vague, it is specific. Same proportions, same stylistic elements, same symbolic positioning in religious contexts. Every major ancient culture revered the serpent. Egypt had the uraeus, the sacred cobra. Chinese civilization built itself around dragon symbolism. Mayan and Aztec cultures worshipped Quetzalcoatl and Kukulkan, feathered serpents. The Hindus described nagas, divine serpent beings. Australian Aboriginals spoke of the rainbow serpent. Different names, different artistic styles. Same core symbolism, serpents associated with wisdom, divine power, creation itself. The tree of life appears in Mesopotamian cylinder seals, showing a stylized tree flanked by figures. Egypt depicts the Djed pillar and sacred sycamores in identical composition. Mayan art shows the world tree in similar form, central trunk, branching symmetry, divine figures on either side. The symbol bridges continents, appearing in cultures that conventional history insists never contacted each other. Architectural details match with uncomfortable specificity. Egyptian columns feature lotus capitals, tops carved to resemble lotus flowers. Ruins at Chavdin de Juntar in Peru show columns with nearly identical capitals. The corbelled arch, a false arch created by offsetting stones inward until they meet, appears simultaneously in Mycenaean Greece and Mayan architecture. Specific geometric patterns decorating Egyptian temples repeat in Mayan temple carvings, spirals, meanders, stepped frets. Linguistic analysis reveals peculiarities. The ancient Egyptian word for pyramid sounds phonetically similar to words meaning sacred mountain in several Mesoamerican languages. Coincidence, linguists argue, but the coincidences accumulate. Words for God, sun, divine show phonetic similarities across supposedly unrelated language families. Two possibilities exist. Either ancient cultures maintained sophisticated contact networks spanning oceans, coordinating architecture and symbols and construction techniques. Contact that left no ships, no trade goods, no archaeological evidence beyond the monuments themselves. Or someone else maintained that network. Someone who traveled globally, teaching the same knowledge, demonstrating the same techniques, leaving the same symbols as proof of their presence. Mainstream archaeology chooses the first option by default, despite the absence of supporting evidence. The monuments themselves suggest the second. Someone moved across the ancient world, sharing knowledge that appeared as divine wisdom to primitive recipients. The architecture, the symbols, the techniques, all fingerprints of the same teacher working with different students across continents and centuries. Over 200 cultures across every inhabited continent tell stories of a great flood. Not just rain, not local flooding. A catastrophic deluge that destroyed the world, killed nearly everyone, required divine intervention to preserve humanity. The details aren't vague, they're specific. Disturbingly specific. A divine being warns a chosen family, build a vessel, gather animals, the flood comes, waters cover everything, months pass. The vessel lands on a mountain, a bird is released to find land, the bird returns, later it doesn't return, signaling dry land exists, survivors emerge. A covenant is made between the divine and humanity, often a rainbow appears. The Sumerian epic of Gilgamesh describes Ziushudra receiving warning from the god Enki. Build a boat, bring your family, preserve the animals. The flood lasts 7 days. The boat lands on Mount Nisa. A dove is released, returns. A raven is released, doesn't return. Ziushudra emerges to rebuild. The Hebrew Genesis describes Noah receiving warning from God. Build an ark, bring your family, preserve the animals. The flood lasts 40 days. The ark lands on Mount Ararat. A dove is released, returns. Later it returns with an olive branch. Finally, it doesn't return. Noah emerges. God creates a rainbow covenant. Hindu texts describe Manu warned by the god Vishnu. Build a ship, preserve life. The flood comes. The ship lands on a mountain. Manu emerges to repopulate Earth. Greek mythology tells of Deucalion warned by his father Prometheus. Build a chest. The flood sent by Zeus destroys humanity. The chest lands on Mount Parnassus. Survivors emerge to rebuild civilization. What if mythology isn't imagination? What if every culture is telling the same true story, just in their own language? The consistency transcends the flood. Nearly every ancient culture describes wars among the gods, conflicts in the heavens resulting in some deities being cast down to earth. Greek mythology tells of Zeus overthrowing the Titans, casting them into Tartarus. Hindu texts describe wars between Devas and Asuras, with defeated Asuras banished. Christian tradition speaks of Lucifer's rebellion, angels cast from heaven. Norse legends tell of conflicts between Aesir and Vanir. Mayan myths describe battles in Xibalba, the underworld between sky gods. Different names, different details. Same core narrative, celestial conflict, defeated faction cast down, survivors struggling with those who remained above. Then there are the hybrid stories. Sky beings descending to mate with human women, producing offspring that were neither fully divine nor fully human. Genesis describes the Nephilim, when the sons of God came in to the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. Greek mythology centers around demigods, Zeus, Poseidon, Apollo repeatedly fathering children with mortal women. Hindu texts describe divine bloodlines, gods taking human form to produce royal lineages. Incan tradition claims their emperors descended from Viracocha, the sky teacher. Chinese and Japanese emperors claimed descent from celestial dragons. Every culture tells this story. Sky beings, human women, hybrid offspring possessing unusual abilities. Sometimes the stories celebrate these bloodlines as superior. Sometimes they describe them as corruption, requiring divine punishment. The catastrophe narratives repeat with equal consistency. There was a golden age, advanced civilization, knowledge beyond what came later. Then destruction, flood, fire, celestial catastrophe. Civilization collapsed. Survivors struggled to preserve fragments of what was lost. Plato described Atlantis, advanced island civilization destroyed by catastrophe in a single day and night. Pacific cultures speak of Lemuria or Mu-sunken continents where advanced peoples lived before disaster struck. Egyptian texts describe Zep Tepi, the first time a golden age before catastrophe required civilization to be rebuilt by gods. Hindu cosmology describes 4 ages, each ending in destruction and requiring renewal. These aren't creative variations on universal themes. The specificity is too consistent. The details too aligned. Flood myths don't just say water destroyed things. They describe vessel construction, animal preservation, bird releases, mountain landings. War in heaven myths don't just say gods fought. They describe specific conflicts, cast down losers, ongoing struggles. Either human psychology across all cultures produces identical fictional narratives with remarkably consistent details, or every culture witnessed the same events and recorded them through their own cultural frameworks. The stories point to something real, something that happened, something catastrophic enough to destroy advanced civilization and require survivors to rebuild from fragments. Göbekli Tepe sits on a hilltop in southeastern Turkey, a temple complex that shouldn't exist. Not because of its engineering, though that is impressive, but because of its age, 11,600 years old, built before agriculture, before pottery, before metallurgy, before civilization as we define it. Built by hunter-gatherers who supposedly spent their days surviving, not organizing massive construction projects requiring hundreds of workers and decades of sustained effort. What if human civilization is older than we think? What if we're not the first time humanity reached for the stars? The paradox deepens when you examine construction quality across time. Göbekli Tepe's oldest layers show the most sophisticated architecture. Massive T-shaped pillars weighing 20 tons, carved with intricate animal reliefs, arranged in precise circular formations. Later constructions at the site show declining quality, smaller stones, cruder carvings, less sophisticated layouts. Time moves forward, but the architecture moves backward, as if knowledge is being lost rather than gained. This contradicts everything we understand about human technological development. Skills should improve across generations. Later construction should exceed earlier work, unless whoever built the earliest structures possessed knowledge that later generations couldn't maintain, unless civilization wasn't rising but recovering. Around 12,800 years ago, Earth experienced the Younger Dryas, a sudden return to Ice Age conditions lasting 1,300 years. Recent evidence suggests this wasn't gradual climate change but catastrophic impact. Cosmic fragments striking ice sheets, causing instantaneous melting, global flooding, climate chaos. The impact theory explains extinction of Ice Age megafauna, the widespread appearance of nanodiamonds in geological layers, and sediment evidence of massive wildfires across multiple continents. If advanced human civilization existed before this catastrophe, the impact would have destroyed most evidence. Cities buried under meters of sediment, coastal settlements drowned by rising seas, survivors reduced to primitive conditions, struggling to preserve fragments of what they once knew. Consider sea levels during the last ice age, 400 feet lower than today. Vast continental shelves exposed, land masses where millions could have lived. When ice sheets melted, these lands disappeared beneath oceans. If advanced civilization built cities on these coastlines, their archaeological evidence sits underwater, dismissed as natural formations or unexplored in ocean depth. The Yonaguni Monument off Japan's coast presents geometric structures, right angles, parallel surfaces, stepped formations, at depths suggesting submersion around 10,000 years ago. Geologists debate whether it is natural or artificial. The formations show features consistent with both, perhaps because advanced humans worked with natural formations, enhancing them, leaving traces that blur the line between natural and constructed. Off Cuba's coast, sonar reveals geometric patterns at depths of 2,000 feet. Near India, structures near the ancient city of Dwarka show evidence of sophisticated urban planning, now submerged. Across the Mediterranean, underwater archaeology reveals settlements older than previously thought possible, drowned by post-Ice Age sea level rise. The Klerksdorp spheres present a different mystery. Found in South African mines embedded in rock dated to 2.8 billion years old, these metallic spheres show parallel grooves around their equators. Natural formation, geologists insist. But the grooves are precise, parallel, consistent, features that suggest deliberate manufacture. If natural, they're extraordinary coincidence. If artificial, they predate any known life forms capable of creating them. The Longyu Caves in China, massive underground chambers carved with precision. No archaeological record of construction, no documented knowledge of their existence until discovery in 1992. 30,000 cubic meters of stone removed with no debris piles, no tool marks explaining methods, no cultural memory of who built them or why. Perhaps ancient monuments weren't primitive humans receiving alien knowledge. Perhaps they were built by survivors of an advanced human civilization, one that understood engineering, astronomy, mathematics, struggling to preserve what remained after catastrophe. Perhaps Göbekli Tepe was built by people who once had cities, technology, accumulated knowledge, now reduced to temple, building as an act of cultural preservation. But this explanation raises its own questions. Where did that advanced civilization gain its technology? How did Ice Age humans develop sophistication matching or exceeding our own? And why do their survivors' stories consistently describe beings from the sky who taught them? Human or alien? Samono possessed impossible knowledge. The Vaimanika Shastra, an ancient Sanskrit text attributed to the sage Maharshi Bharadwaja, reads like an aerospace engineering manual. It describes different classes of aircraft, some for atmospheric flight, others for traveling between worlds. It details propulsion systems using mercury vortex engines, creating anti-gravitational fields through rapid rotation of liquid metal. It explains defensive capabilities, how to make craft invisible, how to detect approaching vessels, how to render enemy pilots unconscious using focused sound waves. Scholars dismiss it as fantasy. Engineers reading the same text see specifications, thrust to weight ratios, energy requirements. Operational parameters. The language is technical, not metaphorical. These aren't gods riding magical chariots. These are instruction manuals describing machines with specific capabilities and operational constraints. When ancient texts describe technology that sounds like science fiction, maybe they're not fiction. Maybe they're instruction manuals we forgot how to read. The Mahabharata, India's ancient epic, describes warfare that sounds disturbingly familiar to anyone who has studied nuclear weapons effects. A single projectile charged with all the power of the universe. An incandescent column of smoke and flame, as bright as 10,000 suns, rose in all its splendor. It was an unknown weapon, an iron thunderbolt, a gigantic messenger of death, which reduced to ashes the entire race. The text continues, describing survivors. The corpses were so burned as to be unrecognizable. Their hair and nails fell out, pottery broke without apparent cause, and the birds turned white. After a few hours, all foodstuffs were infected. To escape from this fire, the soldiers threw themselves in streams to wash themselves and their equipment. Radiation sickness, blast effects, thermal radiation, electromagnetic pulse damaging pottery through rapid heating, contamination requiring decontamination. Either this is remarkable coincidence, ancient poets accidentally describing nuclear warfare millennia before its invention, or it is eyewitness testimony of weapons that shouldn't have existed. The Antikythera mechanism, when fully reconstructed, revealed computational sophistication that has no equivalent in ancient technology. It calculated not just planetary positions, but accounted for elliptical orbits, predicted eclipses years in advance, tracked multiple calendar systems simultaneously. Creating such a device requires accumulated engineering knowledge, precision gear cutting, understanding of differential mechanisms, astronomical data covering centuries of observation. This level of sophistication doesn't appear suddenly. It evolves through generations of refinement. Yet we find it complete with no evidence of developmental stages, as if someone handed ancient Greeks a finished design and said, "Build this." Ancient Chinese texts describe flying vehicles called flying chariots and cloud vehicles. They mention devices for seeing far, instruments that brought distant objects close. They describe sound transmission over distances without physical connection. Strip away poetic language, and you have aircraft, telescopes, and radio communication, described by people who lacked vocabulary for these technologies. Medieval Islamic scholars preserved ancient Greek texts that describe automata, self-operating machines. Not simple mechanical toys, but sophisticated devices using hydraulics, gear systems, programmable sequences. The texts detail mechanical computing devices, automatic doors, self-filling vessels. These weren't theoretical proposals. Archaeological evidence confirms some were built and functioned. Multiple electrochemical cells have been found beyond the Baghdad battery. Similar copper, iron electrolyte configurations in Egyptian tombs, in Mesopotamian sites. Not single anomalies, but evidence of systematic understanding. Ancient cultures knew electricity existed and could be generated. Perhaps they used it for electroplating, lighting, purposes we haven't identified. The technology existed. We found the devices. Surgical instruments from Egyptian, Greek, and Roman sites match modern designs with eerie precision. Scalpels with ergonomic handles. Forceps with locking mechanisms. Bone saws with specific tooth configurations. Shown to contemporary surgeons without archaeological context, they're immediately identified by function. Ancient surgeons didn't accidentally create modern surgical designs. They inherited knowledge from someone who understood anatomy, surgical techniques, instrument engineering. Two interpretations exist. Either primitive people witnessed advanced technology, planes they called metal birds, radios they called voice, transmission devices, nuclear weapons they called divine fire, and recorded what they saw in the only language available. Or they had instruction manuals, technical documents, preserved knowledge from a civilization that understood these technologies and tried to pass that understanding forward. Either way, the texts describe real technology, The question is, who built it? Christopher Dunn spent 40 years as a precision engineer in aerospace manufacturing. He approached the Great Pyramid not as an archaeologist, but as someone who designs functional systems. His analysis, published in the Giza power plant, presents an unsettling hypothesis. The pyramid isn't a tomb, it is a machine. What if the pyramids aren't tombs? What if they're machines, and we've forgotten how to turn them on? Examine the structure as engineering rather than architecture. The king's chamber uses granite blocks, weighing 70 tons each, transported from quarries 500 miles away. Limestone, abundant at Giza, would have sufficed for burial chambers. But granite contains high percentages of quartz crystal. Quartz exhibits piezoelectric properties. Applying pressure generates electrical voltage. The entire chamber, constructed from quartz-rich granite, functions as a massive resonator. The pyramid's internal shafts, traditionally called air shafts, don't provide ventilation. They're too narrow, too precisely angled, sealed at both ends. Dunn's analysis suggests gas distribution channels. The subterranean chamber shows evidence of chemical processes, salt deposits, erosion patterns consistent with hydrochloric acid exposure, hydrogen generation through chemical reaction in lower chambers, channeled upward through shafts, to the king's chamber, where acoustic resonance triggers piezoelectric response in granite, generating electrical current. Speculative. Absolutely impossible to prove without destructive testing Egyptian authorities won't permit, but the engineering makes sense to engineers in ways archaeology doesn't address. Acoustic experiments inside the Great Pyramid reveal it resonates at specific frequencies, particularly around 110 Hz. This matches the fundamental frequency of Earth's electromagnetic pulse. The structure appears designed to amplify these natural vibrations. Stand in the king's chamber and produce certain sounds. The room amplifies them dramatically. Sing specific notes. The chamber resonates so powerfully you feel vibration in your chest. Egyptian temples contain granite boxes. Always granite, always specific dimensions, always empty. Egyptologists call them sarcophagi, despite finding no bodies, no inscriptions, no evidence of burial use. Engineers see different possibilities. The dimensions and material properties resemble transformer housings, electrical capacitors, resonant chambers for energy storage. The boxes sit directly above underground water channels, natural aquifers flowing beneath temple floors. Water moving through piezoelectric stone generates measurable electrical fields. Megalithic sites worldwide preferentially use quartz, rich stone, granite at Giza, diorite at Pumapunku, quartz, heavy blocks at Stonehenge. Coincidence or deliberate selection based on electrical properties? When compressed or subjected to vibration, these stones generate voltage. Build structures from them, subject them to natural seismic vibrations or human-induced resonance, and you create primitive but functional electrical systems. Electromagnetic anomalies cluster at ancient sites. Electronic devices malfunction. Compasses spin. Magnetometers detect field strength variations. Visitors report feeling energy, experiencing vibrations, sensing something active though invisible. Dismissible as imagination until instruments confirm measurable deviations from normal electromagnetic backgrounds. Karnak Temple in Egypt spans over 200 acres, multiple chambers connected by corridors, precise alignments, specific acoustic properties in different rooms. Walk through it as tourist attraction. It is impressive but static. Analyze it as system. Chambers as components, corridors as conduits, alignments as directional elements, and it resembles industrial complex more than religious site. Purpose unknown, but the engineering suggests functionality beyond worship. Modern researchers conducted experiments using sound frequencies inside megalithic structures. Sustained tones at specific frequencies produce measurable electrical responses in granite blocks. Not strong enough for practical use by modern standards, but voltage appears. Primitive battery, energy accumulator, demonstration device teaching principles we've forgotten. The monuments stand silent. Their functions, if any beyond symbolic, remain speculative, but engineers examining them see engineering. Systems designed, components integrated, materials chosen for properties rather than convenience. Perhaps ancient peoples built elaborate tombs and worship sites whose technological sophistication was accidental. Or perhaps we're looking at technology we don't recognize because we've stopped asking what it does and only ask what it means. The Temple of Seti at Abydos contains hieroglyphs that shouldn't exist. Carved into a beam above the temple entrance, they appear to depict modern vehicles, a helicopter with rotor blades and tail boom, a submarine or aircraft with horizontal stabilizers, cylindrical craft with curved edges. Egyptologists explain this as palimpsest, newer plaster carved with different hieroglyphs falling away to reveal older carvings beneath, creating accidental combinations that resemble modern technology. They wrote it all down. They left records, diagrams, eyewitness accounts. We just convinced ourselves it must be mythology. The palimpsest explanation is reasonable. Overlapping hieroglyphs creating random patterns that happen to look like helicopters. Except the images aren't random, they're remarkably specific. The helicopter shows proper proportions, rotor assembly, fuselage, tail configuration. The submarine, like craft, displays symmetry consistent with engineered vehicles. Coincidence creates vague resemblances. These show detail. The Tully Papyrus, allegedly from the annals of Thutmose III's reign, describes events that sound impossible for ancient Egypt. In the year 22, third month of winter, 6th hour of the day, the scribes of the House of Life found it was a circle of fire coming from the sky. It had no head. The breath of its mouth had a foul odor. Its body was 1 rod long and 1 rod wide. It had no voice. The hearts of the scribes became confused and they laid themselves flat on their bellies. Modern historians dispute the papyrus's authenticity. The original, if it existed, disappeared. We have only alleged translations, yet the descriptions merit attention regardless. Multiple fiery circles appearing in formation, silent, moving against the wind, ascending back toward the sky. Either this is elaborate fabrication or documentation of aerial phenomena that ancient Egyptians witnessed and struggled to describe. Sumerian texts speak of the Anunnaki with specificity that exceeds typical mythology. They came from Nibiru, another world. They arrived on Earth seeking resources, specifically gold. They created hybrid beings, mixing their genetic material with primitive humans to create workers. The texts describe this not metaphorically but procedurally. Genetic manipulation, artificial creation, purpose, designed organisms. Treat these as historical documentation rather than fantasy. Someone performed genetic experiments. Someone came from elsewhere seeking resources. Someone created hybrid species. Either Sumerian scribes invented detailed science fiction millennia before the genre existed, or they recorded what they witnessed. The Book of Ezekiel contains one of the most detailed technological descriptions in ancient literature. Ezekiel describes craft descending from the sky. Wheels within wheels, metallic structure gleaming like burnished bronze, beings inside wearing what sounds like pressurized suits, lights brighter than fire. Sounds like rushing wind. His description includes technical details, the wheels moving in any direction without turning, the being's movements coordinated with the vehicle's operation, the craft's ability to rise straight up. Read this as religious vision, and it is mystical revelation. Read it as eyewitness account of advanced craft, and every detail makes technological sense. Wheels within wheels suggest gyroscopic stabilization. Metallic gleaming describes reflective hull materials. Beings in protective suits handling controls. Vertical takeoff capability. Ezekiel provides the kind of specific details witnesses include in credible UFO reports today. Mayan codices, those surviving Spanish destruction, show figures wearing what appear to be helmets with tubes extending to backpacks, oxygen supplies for pressurized suits. They depict beings operating complex control panels, hands positioned over arrays of symbols and devices. They show cylindrical objects ascending on trails of fire, primitive artists, depicting rocket propulsion using available visual vocabulary. The Spanish conquistadors burned nearly all Mayan texts. The Library of Alexandria, repository of ancient knowledge, burned multiple times before final destruction. Chinese Emperor Qin Shi Huang ordered book burnings, eliminating vast quantities of historical texts. What knowledge was lost? What instructions? What documentation? What eyewitness accounts of ancient contact with advanced beings went up in flames? We preserved fragments, pieces that survived through luck or deliberate hiding. What remains suggests the destroyed texts contained information that challenges comfortable historical narratives. They wrote down what they saw, they documented encounters, preserved technical knowledge, recorded evidence of visitors from elsewhere. Then we convinced ourselves it must be mythology, easier than confronting the alternative. Paracas, Peru. The desert necropolis yielded over 300 elongated skulls, some dating back over 2,000 years, not slightly elongated, dramatically reshaped, craniums stretched backward and upward, creating profiles that look distinctly non-human. Archaeologists initially attributed this to artificial cranial deformation, a practice documented in various cultures where infant heads are bound to reshape the growing skull. But some Paracas skulls don't conform to this explanation. They're larger, 25% greater cranial capacity than average human skulls. They're heavier, with bone density measurements exceeding normal ranges. Most tellingly, infant skulls from the same burial sites show the same elongation. Infants, whose skulls were already shaped this way at birth before any binding could have occurred. They found bones that weren't human or weren't quite human. Then the bones disappeared. DNA analysis conducted on Paracas skull samples by independent researchers yielded puzzling results. Some samples showed mitochondrial DNA that didn't match any known human haplogroup, the genetic lineages used to trace human ancestry and migration. The sequences contained mutations and variations that fell outside the range of modern human populations. Mainstream geneticists dispute these findings, citing contamination or testing errors. Yet the results persist in multiple independent analyses. Malta's ancient temple complexes contain similar elongated skulls. Egypt's nobility, particularly during the 18th dynasty, show cranial elongation in statuary and mummified remains. Akhenaten, his wife Nefertiti, their daughters, all depicted with elongated skulls and unusual body proportions. Some Egyptologists explain this as artistic style, the Amarna aesthetic. But why portray yourself inaccurately when Egyptian art elsewhere shows detailed realism? 19th and early 20th century American newspapers contain hundreds of accounts reporting giant skeleton discoveries. The New York Times, Scientific American, local papers across the nation, all documented archaeological findings of human remains measuring 7 to 12 feet tall. Burial mounds in Ohio, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Nevada yielded skeletal remains far exceeding normal human height. Many reports included measurements, photographs, institutional verification. These skeletons vanished. Specimens sent to the Smithsonian Institution for study allegedly disappeared from records. Museum officials claim no knowledge of such specimens. Archaeological documentation from the period confirms discoveries. Current institutional records show nothing. Either hundreds of newspaper accounts fabricated identical stories, or evidence was collected and subsequently suppressed. Biblical texts describe the Nephilim, giants born from unions between sons of God and daughters of men. They possessed 6 fingers on each hand, 6 toes on each foot, dismissed as mythology until archaeologists found skeletal remains matching this description. Graves in Ecuador, in South America, in the Middle East, containing remains with 6 digits per extremity. Not occasional genetic anomalies, but consistent patterns suggesting distinct populations. The Starchild skull, discovered in Mexico in the 1930s, presents features that challenge conventional classification. Shallow eye sockets positioned forward rather than laterally, reduced facial structure. Unusual bone composition showing fiber, like tissue absent in normal human skulls. DNA testing yielded confusing results, some markers matching human DNA, others matching nothing in existing databases. Mainstream science classifies it as hydrocephalic child with severe deformities. Other researchers note the bone density, the unusual tissue composition, the features that don't match any known pathology. Skepticism is warranted. Many claimed giant skeletons are hoaxes, manipulated photos, exaggerated reports, mistaken identification of large animal bones. Most elongated skulls can be explained by cranial deformation practices. DNA contamination can produce false results. Anomalous features might indicate diseases or genetic conditions rather than different species, but some cases resist conventional explanation. Paracus infant skulls born elongated. DNA sequences matching no human population. Consistent 6-digit remains across continents. Documented giant discoveries by credible institutions that subsequently lost all evidence. The pattern suggests something beyond normal human variation, either extreme genetic anomalies clustered in specific populations across the world, or evidence of hybridization, human genetics mixed with something else. The texts said sky beings interbred with humans, creating offspring different from both parents. Perhaps the bones confirm what the stories claimed. They left physical evidence. Biology doesn't lie the way mythology might. Then that evidence disappeared, leaving questions instead of answers. The Nazca Lines stretch across 200 square miles of Peruvian desert. A hummingbird with wings spanning 300 feet. A monkey with a spiraling tail. A spider so anatomically accurate it identifies as a specific species. Geometric lines extending for miles in perfect straightness across varied terrain. All invisible from ground level, visible only from the air. Why would ancient Nazca people create artwork they couldn't see? Unless they could see it, unless they had flight capability, or unless they were creating markers for beings who did. They carved them in stone, they painted them on walls. They depicted beings in suits with helmets emerging from flying crafts. Why would they imagine the same impossible thing across the world? The Tassili-Anajer Plateau in Algeria contains thousands of cave paintings dating back 10,000 years. Among depictions of daily life, hunting, gathering animals, appear figures that don't fit. Beings wearing round helmets with antennae-like protrusions. Bodies enclosed in bulky suits, proportions distinctly non-human. One figure, called the Great Martian God by researchers who discovered it, towers over human figures below, wearing what appears to be a sealed helmet with breathing apparatus. Valcamonica in northern Italy preserves thousands of petroglyphs carved over 8,000 years. Among them, humanoid figures wearing what appear to be pressurized suits, round helmets with rectangular viewing ports, bulky body coverings with surface details suggesting equipment or armor. Primitive artists depicting their shamans, or eyewitness drawings of visitors wearing protective gear. Australian Aboriginal rock art shows the Wandjina, sky beings who, according to legend, came from the heavens to teach the first people. The paintings depict figures with enormous round heads, large eyes, no mouths, surrounded by radiating lines resembling helmets or halos. The Aboriginals maintain they didn't create these images. The Wandjina left them as reminders of their presence. Japan's Dogu figurines date to 14,000 BCE. Ceramic sculptures showing humanoid forms wearing elaborate suits with exaggerated goggles or visors, complex surface patterns resembling rivets or fasteners, articulated sections suggesting segmented armor or pressure suits. Archaeologists interpret them as fertility idols or spiritual representations. But the detail is extraordinary. Why depict spiritual beings in what looks precisely like space suits? Medieval and Renaissance European paintings contain curious details. The Madonna with Saint Giovannino shows a disc-shaped object in the sky with a figure looking up at it. The crucifixion from the Kosovo monastery depicts two symmetrical objects on either side of the cross, resembling modern UFO descriptions. The glorification of the Eucharists includes a golden disc in clouds emitting rays. Artists adding symbolic elements or documenting phenomena they witnessed in skies above. Ancient coins from the Roman era and earlier show unusual celestial objects, not simple stars or stylized suns, but specific disc shapes with details suggesting structure. Why mint coins depicting these unless the object held significance, unless people recognized them? Olmec heads, massive stone sculptures from ancient Mexico, present faces that don't match Native American features, broad noses, full lips, facial structures suggesting African or Polynesian ancestry. Conventional archaeology struggles to explain this. How did Olmec sculptors know what people from other continents looked like, unless they saw them? Unless ancient peoples traveled further than we acknowledge, or unless visitors arrived from elsewhere entirely. Hindu temple paintings show Vimanas, flying vehicles, depicted not symbolically but with technical detail, structural elements, propulsion systems, beings visible through viewing ports. Sumerian cylinder seals show figures emerging from disc-shaped objects, rays emanating downward as if depicting descent from the sky. Buddhist temple art depicts Buddha arriving in a flying disc, surrounded by concentric rings, suggesting rotation. Interpret this symbolically, and it represents spiritual transcendence. But why do spiritual traditions across disconnected cultures choose identical imagery? Why depict transcendence as physical craft if no such craft existed? The artwork is consistent. Cave paintings spanning continents, sculptures separated by oceans, religious art from different faiths, all depicting beings in protective suits, emerging from flying vehicles, descending from the sky. Either humanity across all cultures independently imagined the same impossible thing, or they drew what they saw. Ancient peoples documented their world. They painted animals they hunted, recorded daily activities, preserved important events. When they depicted beings from the sky wearing strange suits and arriving in flying craft, perhaps they were recording reality the same way they recorded everything else. We call it mythology because the alternative is too unsettling. But the artists didn't call it mythology, they called it history. Science is supposed to follow evidence wherever it leads. But what happens when evidence leads somewhere science refuses to go? Paradigm paralysis. The term describes what happens when scientific communities become so invested in existing frameworks that contradictory evidence triggers defensive rejection rather than curious investigation. The phenomenon isn't new, it has happened repeatedly throughout scientific history. Plate tectonics, the theory that continents move, was ridiculed for decades. Alfred Wegener proposed it in 1912 with compelling evidence, matching fossils across separated continents, geological formations that aligned when continents were fitted together, evidence of ancient climate zones now separated by oceans. The scientific establishment dismissed him, called him a pseudoscientist. His theory violated prevailing belief that Earth's crust was immobile. Only after his death did mounting evidence force acceptance. Now plate tectonics forms the foundation of modern geology. Meteorites provide another example. 18th century scientists declared rocks falling from the sky impossible, despite thousands of eyewitness accounts. The prevailing theory held that space contained no solid matter. Reports of meteorite impacts were dismissed as superstition, misidentification, or fabrication. When farmer testimony contradicted academic theory, academics dismissed farmers as ignorant. Only when enough evidence accumulated, including meteorites witnessed by scientists themselves, did the establishment reluctantly accept reality. Barry Marshall and Robin Warren discovered that bacteria cause stomach ulcers. The medical establishment rejected this for years, insisting stress and lifestyle caused ulcers. Marshall finally drank a culture of Helicobacter pylori, gave himself ulcers, cured them with antibiotics, and proved his theory. Even then, acceptance took years. The establishment was too invested in existing treatments, existing explanations, existing careers built on the stress. Ulcer paradigm. Archaeological careers depend on maintaining established chronologies. Publish research supporting conventional timelines. Receive grants. Earn tenure. Build reputation. Propose alternatives suggesting civilization is older. Monuments were built differently, or ancient peoples possessed advanced knowledge, face rejection, ridicule, career destruction. Funding structures reinforce orthodoxy. Research grants support conventional investigations, excavating more pottery shards, refining existing chronologies, documenting known civilizations. Proposals suggesting pyramids might be power generators or ancient texts might describe technology receive no institutional backing. The system financially rewards conformity and punishes innovation. When confronted with inexplicable precision, laser straight cuts through granite, tolerances measured in thousandths of inches, astronomical alignments accurate to fractions of degrees. Mainstream archaeology deploys the incredulity defense. Ancient people were incredibly skilled, but this explains nothing. It is circular reasoning masquerading as explanation. How did they achieve this skill? How was it transmitted? Why does it appear fully developed with no learning curve? Why did it apparently disappear? These questions remain unanswered, dismissed as unnecessary when ancient skill suffices. Peer review designed to maintain scientific rigor becomes gatekeeping mechanism. Papers proposing alternative chronologies, technological interpretations, or evidence of advanced ancient knowledge get rejected regardless of evidence quality. Reviewers don't engage with arguments. They simply note conclusions inconsistent with established understanding and reject publication. Without peer-reviewed publication, theories gain no academic credibility, creating self-reinforcing loop where only orthodox views receive validation. Archaeologists who seriously investigate alternative theories face professional consequences. Graham Hancock, despite decades of research and best-selling books, is dismissed as pseudo-archaeologist. Robert Scotch, a credentialed geologist whose erosion analysis of the Sphinx is geologically sound, faces constant attacks from Egyptologists, who aren't geologists, telling him his geology is wrong. Christopher Dunn's engineering analysis of Egyptian precision is ignored by archaeologists who lack engineering backgrounds. The pattern creates climate of fear. Graduate students interested in alternative theories learn quickly to hide their curiosity. Tenure-track professors avoid controversial research. Established academics dismiss evidence publicly while privately admitting its problems. The institutional structure punishes honesty and rewards conformity. Skepticism plays a vital role in science. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. But dismissing evidence because it doesn't fit current models isn't skepticism. It is dogmatism. Refusing to investigate anomalies isn't scientific rigor. It is intellectual cowardice. The reasoning becomes circular. Ancient monuments are dated based on assumptions about tool technology. This precision requires advanced tools, therefore it is recent. Then, when evidence suggests advanced tool use, it is dismissed. They couldn't have had advanced tools because the dating indicates primitive technology. The logic feeds itself, immune to contradictory evidence. Science advances when evidence forces paradigm shifts. But that requires scientists willing to follow evidence even when it challenges everything they've built careers defending. Mainstream archaeology hasn't reached that point. The evidence accumulates, the questions multiply, and the establishment responds by dismissing questioners rather than addressing questions. We've tried to rebuild what they built. We've failed every time. In 2003, engineers attempting to demonstrate ancient Egyptian construction methods conducted copper tool experiments. They fashioned copper chisels and saws matching archaeological examples. They applied them to limestone blocks identical to pyramid stone. After 6 weeks of sustained work, they achieved rough, irregular cuts nowhere near pyramid precision. The copper tools deformed, bent, required constant resharpening. Scaling this to 2.3 million blocks over 20 years becomes mathematically absurd. The method doesn't work. Attempts to cut granite proved even more futile. Granite rates 7 on the Mohs hardness scale. Copper rates 3. You cannot effectively cut something harder with something softer, basic material science. Experiments confirm this. Copper tools make scratches but achieve no meaningful cutting. Adding sand as abrasive helps marginally, but introduces new problems. The sand grinds away the copper faster than it cuts the granite. Moving massive stones presents its own failures. Nova documentary team attempted replicating ancient Egyptian methods, using wooden sledges, rope, and human labor. They targeted a 2-ton obelisk, smaller than pyramid blocks. The effort required over 100 men, modern safety equipment, perfect conditions, and multiple attempts. Even then, the wooden sledges cracked under stress. The ropes frayed. Coordination became nearly impossible, and this was 2 tons. Pyramid blocks averaged 2.5 tons. Some weighed 15 tons. The granite blocks in the king's chamber weighed 70 tons each. Engineers calculated ramp requirements for pyramid construction. Any ramp maintaining usable incline to reach 480 feet would extend nearly a mile, requiring more material than the pyramid itself. Material that would need to be quarried, transported, and later completely removed without trace. Spiral ramps wrapping the pyramid face impossible corner, turning problems for teams pulling massive stones. Internal ramp theories require constructing ramps inside the structure, then removing them afterward without leaving evidence. Every proposed solution creates more problems than it solves. Modern stone workers attempted replicating Sacsayhuam's precision joints, using diamond-tipped saws, laser measuring equipment, and computer-aided design. They produced blocks with irregular surfaces that fit together tolerably, nowhere near ancient precision. Roger Hopkins, master stonemason, examined the results and admitted, even with power tools and modern measurement, we can't match what they achieved. I don't know how they did it. Acoustic levitation theories propose sound waves could lift massive stones. Laboratory experiments confirm sound can levitate small objects, foam spheres, water droplets, tiny samples. Scaling this to multi-ton blocks requires energy outputs that would devastate human eardrums and require power generation far beyond ancient capabilities. The physics work at small scale. They fail at megalithic scale. Statistical analysis of astronomical alignments eliminates coincidence. The Great Pyramid aligns to true north within 3/60ths of a degree. Calculate the probability of achieving this accidentally. Then factor in the 3 pyramids aligning with Orion's belt. Add Angkor Wat's correlation. Include Stonehenge's solstice alignment. The combined probability approaches 0. These aren't accidents. They're engineered precision. We cannot replicate Roman concrete. Their structures stand 2,000 years later. Aqueducts, bridges, the Pantheon's dome. Our concrete deteriorates in 50 to 100 years. Chemical analysis reveals they used volcanic ash and seawater, creating molecular structures that strengthen over time. We understand the chemistry, we cannot reproduce the results. Something in their process, some technique or proportion, remains unknown. Damascus steel presents similar mystery. Medieval swords with molecular structures showing carbon nanotubes and cementite nanowires, creating legendary sharpness and flexibility. Modern metallurgy understands the composition, but cannot reproduce the forging technique. The knowledge was lost. We can analyze, we cannot replicate. The pattern is consistent, ancient achievements that modern technology struggles to match. Either ancient peoples possessed capabilities and knowledge we've lost, or they had access to technology beyond what archaeology attributes to their time periods. The experiments prove one thing conclusively: the official explanations don't work. Ancient texts describe moving massive stones using sound. Tibetan manuscripts detail monks levitating blocks through coordinated chanting. Egyptian papyri mention priests using voice to manipulate stone. Dismissed as mythology until modern physics discovered acoustic levitation, the principle that sound waves create pressure nodes where gravity's effects can be counteracted. What if ancient peoples understood physics we're only now discovering? What if quantum mechanics isn't new, just rediscovered? Laboratory demonstrations confirm sound can levitate small objects. Specific frequencies create standing wave patterns, areas where acoustic pressure exactly balances gravitational force. Scale becomes the limitation. Moving multi-ton stones would require sound intensities that seem beyond ancient capabilities. Unless ancient acoustics understood principles we're still learning. Unless the monuments themselves, with their resonant chambers and precisely tuned dimensions, functioned as acoustic amplifiers, magnifying human-generated sound to levels capable of achieving what modern physics says should be possible. Granite and quartz exhibit piezoelectric properties. Applying mechanical stress generates electrical voltage. Subject these stones to vibration or pressure, and they produce current. Ancient monuments preferentially used these materials. Coincidence or deliberate selection for electrical properties? The Great Pyramid's granite chambers, when subjected to seismic vibrations or human-produced frequencies, generate measurable electrical fields, small voltages by modern standards. But perhaps ancient builders understood principles of resonance, of accumulation, of how specific geometric configurations amplify these effects. Quantum mechanics reveals that consciousness affects physical reality. The observer effect, particles behaving differently when measured versus unmeasured, demonstrates that conscious observation influences quantum events. Extend this principle. If consciousness affects quantum particles and physical matter consists of quantum particles, then consciousness potentially influences physical reality directly. Ancient practices seem designed around this principle. Meditation, focused intention, ritual chanting, coordinated group consciousness. Perhaps these weren't superstition but applied technology. Methods of focusing human consciousness to influence physical systems at quantum level. Modern physics is beginning to quantify these effects. Experiments show focused human intention producing measurable changes in quantum random number generators, in crystal growth patterns, in biological systems. Small effects, but measurable, reproducible. Zero-point energy, the quantum vacuum's inherent energy, theoretically contains vast power. Quantum field theory describes space not as empty, but as seething with virtual particles constantly appearing and disappearing. The energy density is enormous. Tapping it remains theoretical for modern physics. But what if ancient monuments represent attempts to access this energy? Specific geometric configurations, particular material choices, precise alignments creating resonance with Earth's electromagnetic field, with cosmic radiation, with quantum vacuum fluctuations. Speculative. Absolutely. But the monuments show engineering sophistication that current explanations don't address. Perhaps ancient builders understood that specific shapes, materials, and orientations create quantum coherence, allowing macro-scale quantum effects that modern physics considers impossible in warm, noisy environments. The holographic principle, modern theoretical physics proposing that reality is information encoded on lower dimensional surfaces, sounds like science fiction. Yet it emerges from rigorous mathematics, attempting to reconcile quantum mechanics with gravity. Ancient Vedic texts describe reality as Maya, illusion, information, rather than substance. They describe consciousness as fundamental, with physical reality emerging from informational substrate. Sanskrit texts contain descriptions remarkably aligned with modern physics. The concept of Anu, indivisible particle, predating atomic theory by millennia, descriptions of multiple worlds, parallel dimensions, cyclic time, concepts now explored through multiverse theories and string theory's extra dimensions. Ancient understanding of vast cosmic timescales matching modern cosmology better than the recent biblical chronology that dominated Western thought until the 19th century. Either this represents extraordinary coincidence, ancient peoples accidentally describing advanced physics through mythological language, or they possessed genuine understanding. Perhaps not mathematical formalism, but practical knowledge. Not equations, but engineering principles that worked. Quantum physics reveals universe stranger than classical physics imagined. Particles entangled across distances. Observation affecting reality. Information as fundamental as matter and energy. Ancient texts describe these concepts. Perhaps they preserved knowledge from civilizations that understood what we're rediscovering. Or perhaps beings teaching ancient peoples operated at technological levels where quantum effects become practical tools rather than laboratory curiosities. The connection remains speculative, but ancient wisdom aligns suspiciously well with cutting-edge physics, as if they knew something we forgot. What if we're not the first advanced human civilization? What if we're the second attempt? The Ice Age ended 11,700 years ago. Before that, for over 100,000 years, ice sheets covered much of the northern hemisphere. Sea levels sat 400 feet lower than today. Vast continental shelves lay exposed, land masses larger than India, stretching along coasts, now submerged beneath oceans. If advanced human civilization arose during that period, their cities would be underwater now, their evidence drowned. Their achievements attributed to aliens because we're looking in the wrong place, on dry land rather than beneath the waves. Graham Hancock spent decades researching this possibility. His hypothesis: maritime civilizations thrived along Ice Age coastlines, developing advanced knowledge of astronomy, mathematics, navigation, and engineering. When catastrophe struck, sudden, violent civilization destroying, survivors scattered, carrying fragments of knowledge to primitive hunter-gatherer populations across the world. Those survivors became the gods of ancient mythology, not aliens but advanced humans teaching less developed peoples. The Younger Dryas impact event provides mechanism for this catastrophe. Around 12,900 years ago, cosmic fragments struck North American ice sheets. Evidence accumulates: impact craters in Greenland ice cores, nanodiamonds in sediment layers, indicating extreme heat and pressure, platinum anomalies suggesting extraterrestrial material, cosmic dust markers appearing suddenly in geological records across multiple continents. The impacts triggered instantaneous ice sheet melting, massive flooding, climate chaos, temperatures plummeting within decades. The event killed Ice Age megafauna, mammoths, saber-toothed cats, giant sloths, and potentially devastated human civilizations whose archaeological record sits beneath 400 feet of ocean. Underwater discoveries hint at what was lost. The Yonaguni Monument off Japan shows stepped terraces, right angles, parallel surfaces, features some researchers identify as worked stone rather than natural geology. Dwarka, submerged city off India's coast, matches ancient Sanskrit descriptions of a magnificent capital swallowed by the sea. The Gulf of Kammat Formation displays geometric patterns, suggesting urban planning. Cuban underwater sonar reveals structures at depths indicating submersion over 10,000 years ago. This theory explains sudden appearance of sophisticated culture. Egypt doesn't gradually develop writing, mathematics, and monumental architecture. It appears complete around 3100 BCE. Sumerian civilization emerges fully formed. The Indus Valley culture springs into existence with advanced urban planning, as if someone taught them, as if survivors of destroyed civilizations spread across the world, finding primitive peoples and sharing what knowledge remained. Evidence suggests ancient global contact. Egyptian mummies contain cocaine and tobacco residues, plants native only to the Americas, separated by an ocean ancient peoples supposedly couldn't cross. Olmec heads in Mexico show apparent African facial features. South American architectural techniques appear in Pacific Island construction. Either extensive ancient seafaring occurred, or survivors from a global maritime civilization carried similar knowledge to multiple locations. Perhaps megalithic construction represents survivors using remnant technology and knowledge. They couldn't rebuild what was lost to few people, too little time, catastrophic conditions, but they could create monuments encoding their understanding, astronomical alignments preserving celestial knowledge, mathematical constants embedded in dimensions, engineering demonstrations showing what is possible, messages to future generations. This is what we knew, this is what we could do, this is proof we existed. Plato described Atlantis based on Egyptian sources, advanced island civilization destroyed by catastrophe in a day and night. Dismissed as allegory, but every culture tells similar stories. Mu in Pacific traditions, Lemuria in Indian texts. the first time in Egyptian accounts. Perhaps these aren't fantasy but cultural memory of real civilizations lost to catastrophe. This theory explains much: the sudden appearance of advanced knowledge, the global similarities in construction techniques and astronomical understanding, the monument's sophistication exceeding supposed capabilities of the peoples credited with building them. It requires no alien intervention, just advanced humans predating accepted timelines. But questions remain. How advanced were they really? If they possessed technology comparable to ours, why haven't we found industrial artifacts, metal tools, processed materials? Where did their knowledge originate? And why do ancient texts consistently describe teachers from the sky rather than survivors from drowned cities? The lost civilization theory offers compelling alternative. Yet it doesn't fully explain everything. Perhaps the truth involves both advanced human civilization that itself learned from even more advanced visitors. What if the gods weren't divine? What if they were just visitors from somewhere else, and we built monuments to remember them? The ancient astronaut theory proposes something straightforward. Extraterrestrial beings visited Earth in ancient times, encountered primitive humans, shared technology, and were subsequently remembered as gods in human mythology. Not metaphorical gods representing natural forces, actual physical beings from elsewhere, misunderstood by ancient witnesses who lacked framework for understanding advanced technology. Erich von Däniken popularized these ideas in 1968 with Chariots of the Gods. The book became an international phenomenon, selling millions of copies, spawning countless documentaries and television series. Von Däniken didn't invent the concept. Similar theories appeared in earlier literature, but he synthesized evidence from multiple disciplines into accessible narrative that captured public imagination. The theory rests on several pillars. First, ancient monuments demonstrate technological capabilities exceeding what primitive cultures should possess: precision engineering, astronomical knowledge, construction methods requiring advanced tools. Second, global cultures describe sky gods with remarkably consistent characteristics, beings descending from heavens teaching civilization, promising to return. Third, ancient artwork depicts beings in protective suits and flying craft, imagery that makes more sense as eyewitness documentation than symbolic representation. Fourth, civilization appears suddenly without archaeological evidence of gradual development. Writing, mathematics, monumental architecture, complex social organization, all emerging seemingly overnight in multiple locations, as if taught rather than evolved. Fifth, ancient texts describe genetic manipulation, gods creating hybrid beings by mixing their essence with humans, concepts that sound suspiciously like genetic engineering, described by people who lacked vocabulary for such processes. Consider human evolution's timeline. Anatomically, modern humans existed for 300,000 years. For the vast majority of that time, we lived as hunter-gatherers, creating stone tools, following animal herds, leaving minimal archaeological traces. Then, suddenly, around 6,000 to 10,000 years ago, civilization explodes. Cities, writing, mathematics, engineering, art, religion, complex societies. What triggered this leap? Mainstream anthropology attributes it to agricultural revolution. Farming created food surplus, allowing specialization, leisure time, cultural development. But this doesn't explain the sophistication. Early civilizations didn't fumble toward knowledge. They possessed it immediately, unless someone taught them, unless outside intervention catalyzed the transformation from primitive to civilized. The Fermi paradox asks, if intelligent life exists elsewhere, and even a tiny fraction develops interstellar travel, why haven't we detected them? Where are the aliens? Ancient astronaut theory offers answer. They were here, thousands of years ago, before our technology could document their presence scientifically. We recorded their visits in the only way available: mythology, religious texts, artistic depictions. We built monuments attempting to recreate or commemorate what they taught us. Modern UFO phenomena potentially represent continuation. Military pilots reporting craft exhibiting flight characteristics beyond known technology. government agencies acknowledging unexplained aerial phenomena exist and display capabilities we cannot explain. Perhaps visitation never stopped. Perhaps we're simply now developing technology capable of detecting what ancient peoples could only describe as divine intervention. Von Däniken proposed specific interpretations. The Nazca lines as landing strips for alien craft. Puma Punku's H-blocks as prefabricated components assembled by advanced beings. The Palenque sarcophagus lid depicting Mayan King Pakal operating spacecraft controls rather than descending into underworld. The Egyptian light bulb reliefs showing actual electrical devices rather than mythological scenes. Critics counter that the theory relies heavily on interpretation. Ancient artwork is ambiguous. Technological capabilities, while impressive, might be explained by human ingenuity we underestimate. The theory faces gods of the gaps criticism, attributing to aliens whatever we cannot currently explain, much like previous generations attributed unexplained phenomena to divine intervention. Some claims have been debunked, evidence misrepresented, context ignored. Mainstream archaeology dismisses the entire framework as pseudoscience, refusing serious engagement with even legitimate mysteries the theory attempts to address. Yet the questions persist. The evidence accumulates, and millions worldwide find ancient astronaut theory more compelling than conventional explanations that dismiss rather than address the impossibilities. Maybe the truth is simpler. Maybe ancient peoples were just more capable than we give them credit for. Mainstream archaeology presents coherent explanations for ancient monuments that don't require aliens or lost civilizations. The Great Pyramid employed tens of thousands of workers organized by sophisticated bureaucracy. Ancient Egypt was centralized state, with vast resources, capable of mobilizing labor on massive scale. 20 years of construction with organized workforce, innovative engineering solutions developed through trial and error, and techniques refined across generations of pyramid building preceding Giza's construction. Ancient peoples understood mechanical advantage: levers, pulleys, counterweights, inclined planes. These simple machines, properly applied, allow small forces to move massive weights. Ramps don't need to be permanent. Temporary ramps built and dismantled as construction progressed, explaining why archaeological evidence doesn't remain. Internal ramp theories propose structures built within pyramids during construction, later removed or incorporated into final design. Archaeological evidence supports conventional timelines. Quarries show incomplete obelisks, tool marks consistent with copper and bronze implements, evidence of gradual learning as techniques improved. Early pyramids show experimental designs, structural failures, refinements leading to later perfection. This progression suggests human development rather than sudden knowledge transfer. Radiocarbon dating of organic material in pyramid mortar provides chronological anchors matching conventional Egyptian chronology. Tool typology shows technological progression. Historical records document pharaohs commissioning monuments. The archaeological record, while incomplete, supports gradual cultural development rather than sudden civilizational leap. Skeptics systematically debunk alternative theory claims the Abydos helicopter. Palimpsest eroded plaster revealing underlying hieroglyphs, creating accidental combinations resembling modern vehicles. Elongated skulls. Cranial deformation practiced by numerous cultures, binding infant heads to create distinctive shapes for cultural or status reasons. DNA anomalies result from contamination or degraded samples, not alien genetics. Giant skeleton reports from 19th century newspapers. Largely hoaxes, misidentifications of mastodon bones, or exaggerated journalism from era when newspapers printed sensational stories without verification. No credible museum specimens exist. The Smithsonian conspiracy theory requires institutional cover-up, spanning centuries, logistically implausible given number of people who would need to maintain silence. Ancient texts describing flying craft, metaphorical language common in religious and mythological traditions. Ezekiel's vision represents spiritual experience, not aircraft documentation. Hindu vimanas are mythological vehicles in epic poetry, not technical manuals. Interpreting metaphorical literature as literal documentation imposes modern technological framework on ancient symbolic language. Psychology explains human attraction to mystery. Pareidolia, seeing patterns in random data, causes us to perceive faces in clouds, spacecraft in ancient artwork, modern vehicles in eroded hieroglyphs. We prefer extraordinary explanations over mundane ones because they're more interesting, more emotionally satisfying. Ancient mysteries fuel curiosity, while conventional explanations feel boring by comparison. The insulting ancestors argument carries weight. Suggesting ancient peoples needed alien assistance diminishes remarkable human achievement. It implies our ancestors were incapable of greatness, required help from advanced beings to accomplish what archaeology demonstrates they clearly did accomplish. This perspective, critics argue, reflects modern arrogance, assuming technological sophistication represents the only form of intelligence or capability. Ancient peoples spent lifetimes mastering crafts. Knowledge passed through apprenticeship systems spanning generations. Master builders dedicated entire careers to perfecting techniques we dismiss as impossible because we lack their accumulated expertise. Modern people, accustomed to power tools and instant results, struggle to imagine what sustained human effort over decades can achieve. Mainstream archaeology acknowledges imperfect understanding. Many questions remain unanswered. Conventional theories don't explain all evidence perfectly, but science advances through refining explanations, not abandoning reason for speculation. The absence of complete explanation doesn't validate alternative theories lacking supporting evidence. Fair criticism. Mainstream archaeology sometimes exhibits institutional arrogance, dismissing legitimate questions, resisting new evidence that challenges established narratives. This creates space for alternative theories to flourish where conventional science fails to address obvious mysteries adequately. Perhaps the truth involves neither aliens nor lost advanced civilizations. Perhaps it is human capability we've underestimated all along. 20,000 words of evidence, hundreds of monuments, dozens of cultures, millennia of mystery. Now comes the difficult part, deciding what it means. The evidence doesn't give us certainty, it gives us questions, better questions than the ones we started with. Start with what we know for certain. Ancient monuments exist. They demonstrate precision and sophistication that challenge our understanding of ancient capabilities. The Great Pyramid aligns to true north within fractions of a degree. Saxe-Harmsen's stones fit together so perfectly that razor blades cannot penetrate the joints. Pumapunku's blocks show surfaces parallel to thousandths of an inch. These aren't disputed facts, they're measurable realities. We know ancient cultures possessed sophisticated astronomical knowledge, Mayan calendars tracking time more accurately than modern systems. Babylonian tablets calculating planetary movements with precision not matched until the 20th century. Egyptian monuments encoding mathematical constants and celestial relationships. This knowledge existed. The question is where it came from. We know global cultures separated by oceans tell remarkably similar stories. Sky beings descending, teaching civilization, creating hybrid offspring, departing with promises to return. The consistency transcends coincidence. Either human psychology universally generates identical narratives, or these accounts reflect actual events interpreted through different cultural lenses. We know civilization appears suddenly. Egypt emerges fully formed around 3100 BCE, with writing, mathematics, monumental architecture, and complex social organization. No clear evolutionary precedent. Same pattern repeats in Sumeria, the Indus Valley, Mesoamerica. Knowledge appearing complete rather than developing incrementally. What remains unknown? Exact construction techniques. We've attempted replication using hypothetical ancient methods. We've failed. But failure to replicate doesn't prove impossibility, only that we don't understand the methods used. Perhaps techniques existed that left no archaeological trace. Perhaps knowledge was deliberately kept secret, transmitted through oral tradition rather than written documentation. The extent of ancient contact between cultures remains unknown. Did Egyptians trade with South Americans? Did global maritime civilizations exist before catastrophe destroyed them? Or did isolated cultures independently discover identical solutions? Because fundamental physics and mathematics are universal. The full scope of lost knowledge cannot be measured. Libraries burned. Civilizations collapsed. Knowledge systems disappeared. How much was lost? What capabilities existed that we've forgotten? The absence of evidence proves nothing when catastrophe destroys the archaeological record. Framework for evaluation requires intellectual honesty. Occam's razor suggests the simplest explanation is usually correct. But what is simpler? Ancient humans developing capabilities that modern technology struggles to replicate, or outside intervention providing knowledge and possibly assistance? Simplicity depends on your starting assumptions. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. The ancient astronaut theory qualifies as extraordinary. But at what point does accumulated circumstantial evidence become extraordinary? Dozens of unexplained monuments, hundreds of consistent mythological accounts, measurable precision exceeding modern capabilities, physical artifacts suggesting advanced technology. How much circumstantial evidence equals one piece of direct proof? Absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. If extraterrestrial visitors came thousands of years ago, what traces would remain? Spacecraft materials would corrode. Electronic devices would deteriorate. Any technology sufficiently advanced would be indistinguishable from what survived, incorporated into monuments, mistaken for religious artifacts, or completely decomposed. We might be looking at evidence without recognizing it. The spectrum of positions ranges from hardcore conventional skeptics who accept only mainstream archaeology to moderate skeptics acknowledging mysteries while resisting alien theories, to proponents of lost human civilizations, to ancient astronaut supporters, to those who believe truth involves combination of factors. Each position holds valid concerns. Each addresses some evidence while struggling with other aspects. Intellectual humility demands acknowledging uncertainty. We don't have all answers. Certainty in either direction may be premature. The confident skeptic dismissing all alternative theories ignores legitimate mysteries. The confident believer accepting ancient aliens as proven fact overlooks gaps in evidence. Truth likely occupies middle ground we haven't fully mapped. Future discoveries could change everything. Deep ocean exploration might reveal underwater ruins of lost civilizations. Genetic analysis of anomalous skeletal remains might reveal surprising heritage. Declassified government information about UFO phenomena might provide context for understanding ancient accounts. Archaeological evidence from newly explored sites might fill crucial gaps. The question isn't, do you believe in ancient aliens? That frames inquiry as binary choice requiring faith-based commitment. The better question, what best explains the evidence we have, given what we currently know? And perhaps most importantly, what should we investigate next to better understand our past? The evidence leaves us here, certain of mysteries, uncertain of solutions, equipped with better questions than we started with. These aren't just questions about the past. They're questions about who we are, where we came from, and what we might become. Each possibility carries profound implications for human self-understanding. If ancient astronauts visited Earth thousands of years ago, humanity isn't alone in the universe and never was. Everything changes. Our cosmic perspective shifts from isolation to contact. Our religions might preserve historical documentation rather than faith-based mythology. Our sense of human achievement becomes contextualized. What we built versus what we were taught to build. If lost advanced human civilizations existed and were destroyed by catastrophe, we face different unsettling realization. We're not the first attempt at technological society. Civilization isn't inevitable upward progression, but cyclical rise and fall. The monuments aren't testaments to continuous human advancement, but warnings. Evidence that knowledge can be lost, that catastrophe can reset everything, that no civilization is permanent. If ancient peoples achieved these feats independently through capabilities we've underestimated, we confront our own arrogance. We've built worldview around assumption that technological sophistication represents pinnacle of human achievement, that modern equals superior. But what if different forms of knowledge existed? What if ancient peoples understood principles we've forgotten? What if wisdom doesn't correlate with smartphones and satellites? The implications transcend academic debate. Our entire framework for understanding reality comes into question. Linear progress, the comfortable narrative that humanity steadily advances from primitive to sophisticated, may be illusion. Knowledge can be lost as well as gained. Catastrophe can obliterate millennia of accumulated understanding. Our current technological society, which feels permanent and inevitable, may be far more fragile than we assume. These ideas challenge both religious and scientific orthodoxies. Religious texts describing beings descending from sky, teaching humans, creating hybrid offspring. What if these aren't metaphorical but historical? What if Genesis, the Vedas, Sumerian tablets document actual events? Scientific materialism, the assumption that physical matter and natural laws explain everything, struggles with consciousness effects, quantum observations, and anomalies these monuments present. Human history might extend far deeper than current models suggest. Our species existed for 300,000 years. Why did civilization suddenly emerge only in the last 10,000? What happened in those previous 290,000 years? Perhaps we've been intelligent, capable, and culturally sophisticated far longer than archaeological record currently demonstrates. The humility these mysteries should inspire matters more than any specific answer. If we don't fully understand our own past, if the monuments our ancestors left behind still perplex us, how confident should we be about our interpretations of present and future? Perhaps certainty itself is the problem. Perhaps intellectual humility, acknowledging what we don't know, opens space for discovery that rigid orthodoxy prevents. Studying these mysteries transforms education from memorization to investigation, teaching children that we don't have all answers, that mysteries remain unsolved, that questioning authority represents intellectual virtue rather than defiance. This cultivates curious minds rather than compliant ones. The monuments become invitations to think rather than facts to memorize. These structures represent shared human heritage, transcending national boundaries and modern divisions. Whether built by aliens, lost civilizations, or ancient ingenuity, they belong to all humanity. Ancient wisdom encoded in stone that challenges us to think bigger, question deeper, imagine wider possibilities. What does studying these mysteries teach beyond the mysteries themselves? To question authority, to seek evidence, to remain open to possibilities, to hold beliefs loosely rather than desperately, to accept uncertainty without anxiety, to recognize that not knowing can be more valuable than false certainty. These questions about the past ultimately concern the future. Understanding who we were helps us imagine who we might become. If ancient peoples achieved greatness through human capability alone, we inherit that capability. If they received help from advanced beings, perhaps we'll make that contact again. If lost civilizations rose and fell before us, we must learn from their fate. The monuments stand as questions carved in stone, and questions properly asked change everything. The monuments still stand, the questions remain, and now you're part of the investigation. This documentary presents evidence and theories, not definitive answers. The true scientific approach involves ongoing inquiry rather than settled conclusions. Certainty closes investigation. Curiosity keeps it alive. The mysteries endure precisely because they resist easy explanation, which makes them worth pursuing. Your investigation begins where ours ends. Visit ancient sites personally. Stand before the Great Pyramid at dawn. Run your hands along Sacsayhuam's impossible joints. Feel the scale of Baalbek's megaliths. Photographs cannot capture what presence reveals. Form your own impressions unfiltered by narration or interpretation. Read primary sources, ancient texts, archaeological reports, engineering analyses. Scientific studies examining precision, dating methods, construction theories. Don't rely solely on documentaries, including this one, or popular books. Examine original research, evaluate methodology, distinguish between what research has actually found and what they speculate it means. Engage with both mainstream and alternative researchers. Read skeptical archaeologists who defend conventional chronologies. Read alternative theorists proposing lost civilizations or ancient contact. Compare their evidence. Evaluate their reasoning. Notice where they agree. Those agreements often reveal what is genuinely established versus what remains disputed. Think critically about all sources. Ask what evidence supports each claim. Distinguish between direct observation, reasonable inference, and speculation. Recognize when arguments rely on absence of evidence rather than presence. Notice rhetorical techniques versus substantive proof. Apply the same rigor to alternative theories that you apply to mainstream explanations. Hold beliefs loosely. Being wrong is part of discovery. New evidence should change your mind. That is not weakness, but intellectual strength. The moment you become certain, you stop investigating. Maintain that productive uncertainty that fuels curiosity rather than anxiety. Engage these ideas in community. Discuss openly while respecting different conclusions. Share information without forcing beliefs. People will disagree about ancient astronauts, lost civilizations, human capabilities, what evidence means. Those disagreements generate valuable discussions if approached with mutual respect. The conversation matters as much as any conclusion. Balance open-mindedness with skepticism. Be willing to consider unconventional ideas without accepting them uncritically. Extraordinary claims require substantial evidence, but recognize some evidence is circumstantial by nature. Demand rigor from alternative theories and mainstream explanations equally. Distinguish healthy questioning from conspiracy thinking. The difference: healthy skepticism follows evidence and accepts when wrong. Conspiracy thinking dismisses contradicting evidence and becomes unfalsifiable. The questions matter more than answers. Asking why and how and who develops critical thinking, applicable far beyond ancient mysteries. These habits of mind, examining evidence, questioning authority, tolerating uncertainty, revising beliefs, strengthen intellectual capability in all domains. These mysteries remain unsolved because they're difficult, complex, and challenge fundamental assumptions, which makes them worth investigating. Easy questions bore us. Impossible questions transform us. Ancient monuments pose impossible questions that generations haven't answered. Perhaps your generation will. Look at the night sky differently now. Those stars aren't just beautiful, they're potential homes to civilizations that might have visited here, might have taught our ancestors, might return. Or they're reminders that humanity achieved greatness through capability we've underestimated. Either possibility inspires awe. Look at ancient monuments differently, not as tourist attractions or history lessons, but as questions carved in stone. Questions about human potential, about knowledge lost and rediscovered, about our place in cosmos, about what is possible when we push beyond assumed limitations. Whether aliens, lost civilizations, or remarkable human achievement built these monuments, the true marvel is that they inspire us to ask bigger questions about existence, capability, and possibility. The monuments endure, the mysteries persist, and the investigation continues with you.